Welcome to a night where the familiar bends and the ordinary turns just a little wrong. You've tuned into the Little Dream, a place where clocks hesitate, reflections lie, and the objects around you may no longer be yours. Tonight we travel 5 dark corridors, a car that drives itself on a cursed highway, a mirror that sees through your eyes, a clock that steals memories, a building that shapes your mind, and a trinket that traps your very presence. Each story is a confession, a fragment of a life that might have been, or still is. So, settle in, listen closely, and remember, some things you hear tonight are not meant to leave this room, because once they enter your mind, they may never leave. The red dress on Route 17. The rain began just past the city limits. Not a storm. Not yet, just a light drizzle that turned the world into a wet blur of motion. The wipers groaned across the windshield, dragging streaks of gray light over the glass. My car smelled faintly of old coffee and damp upholstery, and the radio kept slipping in and out of static. It was a Friday night. I'd stayed too long at work again. The kind of night when every road feels like a confession you never meant to make. I told myself I'd take Route 17 to shave off 10 minutes. I'd done it before the back road that cuts through the pine fields and dead suburbs. Most people avoided it because of the stories, but I didn't believe in that kind of thing. Ghosts belong in movies, not in the buzzing silence between raindrops. The dashboard clock flickered. 11:43 p.m. I was late for dinner with Mia. She'd stopped waiting hours ago, probably. She always said I cared more about machines than people. I didn't tell her, but maybe she was right. Machines don't leave. Machines don't sigh when you talk too long about work. The rain deepened. The wipers sped up, slapping in rhythm with my heartbeat. I rolled down the window a crack, just enough to let in the cold smell of wet asphalt. There was a strange sweetness in it, like rusted sugar. That's when I saw the sign. Route 17, closed, after midnight. I hesitated. It was only 11:50, plenty of time. The turnoff came fast. 2 faded reflector posts, one hanging at an angle. The road curved away from the highway, like a quiet invitation. The moment my tires hit the old asphalt, I felt it. The difference. The hum of the road changed pitch, like driving across the ribs of a sleeping animal. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just rain and trees and the low breathing of the engine. I started to relax. I even hummed along to the radio, an old love song that broke apart every few seconds with static. But then, the static began to shape itself. It wasn't random. There were syllables, breaths, a woman's voice. You missed the turn. I froze. The song had stopped entirely now. The station was dead, nothing but white noise, and beneath it, that whisper again. Go back. I turned the knob. The voice dissolved into static. I told myself it was just a transmission bleed truck or radio, maybe. Nothing supernatural. I laughed out loud just to prove to myself that I could. The laugh didn't sound like mine. Up ahead, the rain thinned. The trees opened into a straight stretch of road. My headlights cut through mist, painting silver streaks across the guardrails. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing dead center in the lane. A woman, or the shape of one, wearing a red dress that clung wetly to her legs. Her hair hung long and black, plastered to her face. I slammed the brakes. The car screamed. The world jerked forward and stopped. For a long second, there was nothing but the ticking of the cooling engine and the wild pulse in my throat. The headlights bathed the empty road ahead. No one there. Just mist and the shadow of trees. I leaned forward, scanning the asphalt. No body. No footprints. Nothing. That's when I noticed it. The passenger seat belt, it was buckled. My breath caught. I hadn't done that. I reached out slowly, hand trembling, and unlatched it. The click echoed too loudly in the small space. Then the seat shifted. Not much, just a small indentation, like the weight of someone leaning back. The leather creaked softly, as though exhaling. Hello. My voice cracked. Nothing. The rain returned in a sudden wave, hammering the roof. The car shook slightly, like something had brushed against the bumper. I tried the ignition. It coughed. Once, twice, then died. "Come on," I whispered, turning the key again. Only silence. Then, a sound. Soft, wet, impossible. A fingertip brushing across glass. I turned slowly toward the passenger side window. A streak ran down the fogged glass, tracing the outline of a heart. Inside the heart, a single word formed in the condensation. "Stay." My mouth went dry. I wiped the window with my sleeve, but the word didn't smear, it was etched, faintly scratched into the glass itself. Somewhere inside the car, the radio clicked on by itself. The static returned, and beneath it, a hum low, mechanical, like an idling engine far away. And then, softly, a woman's voice whispered, almost tender, "You shouldn't have stopped." I don't remember deciding to move, but I did. I threw the door open, stumbled out into the rain, boots slipping on the slick pavement. The air was colder here, sharp enough to burn my lungs. The road stretched behind me, empty, endless. No headlights in sight. Ahead, only mist. But when I turned back, I saw her, the woman in red, standing by the driver's side door. She was looking down, not at me, but at the reflection of the road in the window. Her head tilted slightly, as though listening to something inside the car. Then she looked up. Her face wasn't blank or monstrous. It was calm, beautiful, in a distant way, pale as river fog, eyes too bright to be human. They glowed faintly red, like taillights fading into distance. And then she smiled, not cruelly, almost gratefully. She reached for the driver's door handle. The car unlocked with a soft click. Before I could move, she was inside. The engine started on its own. The headlights flared, painting me in white. The windshield wipers began to move again, rhythmic, steady. The radio hummed with her voice faint, almost affectionate. "It's been so long." The car began to roll forward, slowly, smoothly. The driver's seat looked empty, but the steering wheel turned on its own, as if guided by invisible hands. I stumbled backward off the road, nearly falling into the ditch. The car glided past me, its tires hissing over the wet pavement. As it passed, I caught a glimpse inside the passenger seat was empty. The back seat, too. But the rearview mirror tilted toward me, and in it, I saw her reflection sitting behind the wheel, eyes glowing, mouth moving as if singing along to the static. Then, just before the car disappeared into the fog, I heard her voice one last time, through the open radio signal. "See you soon, Ethan." The rain hadn't stopped. It hadn't even changed. Same rhythm, same faint hiss across the windshield. But something about it felt synchronized, like each drop struck the glass in rhythm with a slow, deliberate breath. Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The dashboard lights glowed a weak amber, casting his hands in a sickly hue. The wipers dragged across the glass again and again, squeak, pause, squeak, mechanical, steady, almost heartbeat-like. He looked at the empty passenger seat. Empty. He wanted it to stay that way. But the smell of wet perfume lingered faint, floral, sweet, and wrong, like roses that had been drowned too long in stagnant water. He shook his head and exhaled. "It's just the rain," he muttered to himself. "Just a long night, too much caffeine, not enough sleep." He turned up the radio. A burst of static filled the cabin, and a woman's voice broke through, distant, muffled, like someone whispering from under a blanket of white noise. "Keep driving." Ethan froze. He leaned forward, eyes darting to the screen on the dashboard. The radio display flickered, the station number scrambled, jumping between random frequencies before settling on 17 FM. That wasn't even a real station. "What the hell?" Ethan mumbled, reaching to turn it off. The button clicked, but the radio didn't stop. The static deepened, and through it, he heard something else. The faint rustle of fabric, the delicate scrape of fingernails across leather. From the passenger seat, Ethan turned his head slowly. There in the corner of his vision, something shimmered red. a corner of cloth, soaked and glistening under the faint dashboard light. He blinked, and it was gone. Just his jacket. Had to be. Right, he whispered, his throat dry. No ghosts. Just. He cut himself off, because the seatbelt on the passenger side had latched itself. Click. Snug, like someone invisible had just buckled in beside him. He hit the brakes. The car screeched, fishtailing on the wet asphalt before coming to a shaky stop. His heart pounded against his ribs. He glanced again. The seatbelt remained fastened, tight across nothing. Okay, he breathed, hands trembling. Okay, that's enough. He unbuckled his own belt and reached across, trying to unclip the passenger's latch. It didn't move. He yanked it harder still, locked. And then, under his fingertips, he felt it pressure. Like something pressing back from the other side, holding the belt in place. Ethan jerked his hand away as if burned. Outside, the rain intensified. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, winding an endless Route 17 stretching out like a black artery through the forest. No signs, no houses, no passing cars. Just trees pressing close on both sides, dripping and whispering. He glanced at the GPS. It glitched again, rerouting endlessly, drawing and redrawing the same short loop of road over and over. The same label appeared in the corner. Route 17 detour active. There was no detour, and just below the map, text blinked in red. Passenger connected. He killed the engine. Silence. For a moment, the only sound was rain ticking on the roof. Then came the breath, slow, feminine, too close. It fogged the inside of the windshield from the passenger's side. Ethan froze. The condensation spread, and within it letters began to form, shaky, uneven, drawn by an unseen fingertip. Take me home, he whispered. Who are you? No answer. Only the faint creak of leather as the invisible weight in the seat shifted. Minutes passed before Ethan dared start the car again. He didn't even look at the seat this time. He stared straight ahead and pressed the accelerator. The tires hissed on wet pavement. The road twisted sharply, and as he turned, he caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. A woman's face, pale and blurred by motion. She was sitting behind him, in the back seat, her head tilted. Her mouth moved. Ethan slammed the mirror upward so he couldn't see it. Not real, he whispered. Not. A sound interrupted him. Click. The seatbelt on the passenger side unlatched. Then, the soft drag of fabric over the console, a shape leaning closer. The air temperature dropped suddenly. His breath fogged in front of him. In the reflection of the dark windshield, he saw it clearly now. A red silhouette sitting beside him, head slightly bowed, hair plastered to her face as if she'd just climbed out of the rain. Her voice was the same whisper from the radio. Why did you stop for me? Ethan's mouth went dry. I didn't. I swerved. You saw me, she said. You saw the red dress. He didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the dashboard. The fuel gauge needle had begun to drop unnaturally fast. The car shuddered, as though something heavy clung to its frame. The radio came alive again, this time with an old song, soft and distant, a woman humming along to a melody that might have been from the 1940 seconds. She leaned closer. I was trying to get home. Her reflection lingered faintly in the window. White face, red dress, and the hollow glint of eyes that seemed made of glass. Ethan swallowed. What? What happened to you? For a long time, the only response was the hum of the tires, the low murmur of the engine. Then, softly, I missed my turn. Her laugh was quiet, almost tender, and he didn't stop. Ethan frowned. Who? But the answer came in a voice that wasn't hers. A man's voice, echoing faintly from the radio, distorted and metallic. She ran out into the road. Static swallowed the rest. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. He realized his fingers were trembling not from fear but cold. The vents were blowing freezing air now, though he hadn't touched the controls. He turned the knob to heat. Nothing changed. Then he noticed the reflection again, her hand on his arm. He gasped and looked, but no one was there. Only the faint impression of a handprint, fogged onto the glass beside him. The headlights flickered. The road ahead seemed to warp, stretching into an infinite dark corridor. He saw something glinting in the distance, metal, twisted and wet. As he got closer, the shape took form. A wrecked car, half buried in the ditch, its hood crumpled and windshield shattered. The taillights were faintly glowing red, the same model as his. Ethan slowed, heart hammering. The rain softened. He could hear the ticking of cooling metal from the wreck, even though he was still 20 feet away. His wipers dragged across the glass again. Through the smear of water, he saw movement. A figure inside the wreck. A woman in red slumped forward against the steering wheel. "No," Ethan whispered. "No, no." The radio hissed back to life. Her voice again closer now, almost inside his ear. "You saw me once. You stopped. You became the next." Ethan's chest tightened. He turned the wheel sharply, tires screaming against the slick asphalt. But the road didn't change. The wreck didn't disappear. He passed it again, and again. Each time, the same taillights glowing in the dark. The same woman slumped over the wheel. He realized he was trapped, not by the road, but by the loop. The brooding hum of the car's engine became the only sound. The radio static fell silent. The world outside blurred into black. Ethan forced himself to speak. "What do you want from me?" No answer. Only the faint reflection of her eyes, crimson now, glowing softly in the glass. He gritted his teeth. "You want to drive, is that it? Take the damn car." She smiled, and for the first time, her voice sounded content. "Thank you." The steering wheel jerked violently out of his hands. The car accelerated on its own, speedometer climbing. Ethan tried the brakes, nothing. The pedals sank uselessly beneath his foot. The headlights illuminated the trees, whipping past, the white lines flashing by faster and faster. He screamed, "Stop!" The woman's laughter filled the cabin, faint, distorted, fading into static, and then silence. When Ethan opened his eyes, the car was parked neatly on the roadside. The rain had stopped. The seat beside him was empty, but the seatbelt was still buckled. He reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The engine hummed softly, though he hadn't touched the key. The GPS lit up again. Route 17 loop active. Passenger. Connected. Ethan whispered her name without realizing, not because he knew it, but because somehow she'd already placed it in his mind. Glada. The radio crackled one last time. Her voice whispered, "Your turn to drive." The car shifted into gear on its own and rolled forward, slow and steady, down Route 17. Outside, the rain began again, and this time, the wipers moved to a rhythm. The car's headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the slick asphalt ahead like a river of liquid silver. Ethan's knuckles were white around the steering wheel, yet it moved forward with an almost sentient persistence, obeying some force he could not resist. He wanted to scream, but the cabin swallowed his voice, leaving only the low hum of the engine and the subtle whisper of rain against metal. He dared a glance to the passenger seat. Empty. Always empty. And yet, the air felt thick there, heavy, warm, scented faintly of wet roses and something metallic like iron left out in the rain. He wanted to tell himself it was imagination, that he was tired, overworked, and his brain was playing cruel tricks. But deep down, he knew. He knew the seat wasn't empty. A reflection caught his eye in the rearview mirror just for a split second. Crimson. A flash of red fabric. Movement. His heart hammered. The GPS flickered. Route 17 stretched on endlessly, but something was off. The lines of the road, the trees on either side, even the guardrails all subtly shifted, rearranging themselves as if the road was alive, folding back on itself. Ethan pressed the brakes. The car slowed, but the gear shift resisted him, jerking forward as if testing his will. He slammed both hands down. Nothing. And then the whisper. It wasn't coming from the radio. Not from the rain, it was inside his head, clear, calm, teasing. "You cannot leave. Not yet." He swallowed hard, trying to focus on the lines of the road. Each turn seemed familiar and wrong. He recognized the curves, the dips in the asphalt, the cracked reflector posts. But no matter how far he drove, they repeated. Each bend led back to the same spot, the same patch of road where the wrecked car had waited. And sometimes, in the distance, a figure would appear blurred by motion and rain. Red, crimson, watching, waiting. The first time, he almost swerved off the road. The second time, he slammed on the brakes again. Nothing. The third time he realized it wasn't appearing in front of him. It was behind, always behind. Time became meaningless. He tried to track it, counting the seconds between flashes of red, but his mind rebelled. His wristwatch had stopped. The radio cycled through stations that didn't exist. The raindrops fell in irregular patterns, but each patter seemed to echo in his chest, hammering in rhythm with his heartbeat. And always, that scent roses and iron. He could feel it pressing against his temples, suffocating, sweet, and dangerous. Ethan gritted his teeth. I am not yours, he muttered aloud. The sound came back faint, muffled, as if she were whispering it for him. Her voice followed immediately. Oh, Ethan, you are. You always were. The car jolted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if affirming her words. The wheel resisted every movement of his hands. He gritted his teeth, fighting, but the car had a mind of its own. The interior lights flickered. Ethan blinked. The red fabric seemed to materialize on the passenger seat. Not a shadow, not a reflection, a shape, delicate yet deliberate, curling into the seatbelt as if she were sitting there. The movement was subtle, a slow, almost teasing arching of shoulders, a hint of wet hair falling over her face. Her voice, now louder, clearer. You stopped for me once. You are mine. Don't fight. Ethan's pulse raced. I won't be controlled. I'm driving. And the words left his mouth and died in the car. He could feel her reaction, a weight pressing against his right hand, cold and firm, like a grip from inside the leather, forcing him to relent. The wipers moved on their own, swiping with irregular rhythm. Rain sprayed into the cabin through the slightly cracked window, and the GPS, the map, now showed more than Route 17. It showed paths that weren't there, roads folding into themselves, creating impossible loops. Red arrows traced endless circles, over and over. A voice hers, maybe his own, whispered from nowhere and everywhere. It's just to drive, forever. He tried to step out. The door handle wouldn't budge. The locks engaged themselves. Panic bloomed in his chest, thick and choking. He banged against the window. The glass didn't shatter, it pulsed like a membrane. Alive, responding to the rhythm of his panic. Outside, the trees twisted, warped, stretching into grotesque forms. Their reflections in the windshield formed faces, silent mouths opening, closing, mocking. The faint red glow appeared again in the mirror, closer, closer, until he felt her breath behind his ear. Soft, cold, metallic, sweet. You are the passenger now, not the driver. Ethan's hand shook violently. He attempted to steer. The wheel moved, but only enough to give the illusion of control. Each turn led back to the same wreck, the same stretch of road, the same looping shadows. The radio flickered. Static. And then, faint laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, but hollow, echoing, stretching, longer than time. He realized the voice had changed. Her laughter had merged with the hum of the engine. She was inside the car. The car was her body. The road outside became a blur. Trees folded into themselves. Headlights reflected not on asphalt, but in an infinite crimson corridor. He could see his own reflection in the rearview, pale, eyes wide, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and rain. Behind that reflection, a shadow moved. A red dress, curling and swaying as if it had weight and life. And the eyes, glassy and burning, stared at him. Ethan swallowed. What do you want from me? A pause. Then her voice. Clear, definitive, in his ear. I want the journey to continue. I want the loop, and you are mine to keep it alive. The car lurched. Tires screeched. Ethan's stomach rose, twisted, and fell. The world outside went red. The endless dark smeared into motion. He realized then the wrecked car, the flashing red dress, the whispered instructions. It wasn't about death. Not yet. It was about control. Route 17 was a cage, but he was the bait. The loop didn't end. It never ended. The red dress glimmered faintly in the passenger mirror. He could just barely make out a finger, pointing at the GPS, at him, at the road. She was smiling, a smile that didn't touch her eyes. The map on the dashboard traced itself in crimson lines, circles, over and over. No exit. You drive, I ride. We continue. Ethan's hand shook. There has to be a way out. The car purred, almost gently. The engine's hum rose in pitch. And then, as if answering him, a third reflection appeared in the windshield. His own pale face, split in half by the shadow of red, half of him already claimed. The whisper now merged with his thoughts. Stop resisting. It's easier that way. Ethan gasped, leaning back, feeling the passenger seat shift again, warm and tangible. The air around him thickened. The rain outside slowed, forming a heavy sheet of droplets. Each drop landed in perfect, synchronized rhythm. Heartbeat. He understood. Fully. Route 17 was never a road. It was a ritual. The woman in red did not wander. She waited. She didn't need a body, she needed a driver. And he was the passenger. The GPS blinked again. Route 17 loop active. The wipers moved to a rhythm, not his own. The tires hummed in perfect unison with the pulses of her presence. Ethan's hands lifted slightly from the wheel, trembling. But he didn't resist, because deep down, he knew the longer he fought, the faster the loop would tighten. The red dress would consume him anyway. Better, he thought, to survive the ride somehow. Somehow. The road curved again, perfectly. The wreck loomed ahead. The red dress appeared in the rearview mirror. And her smile. Oh, her smile. It promised eternity. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, each droplet now striking the windshield with a deliberate, almost methodical cadence. Ethan's fingers hovered over the wheel, trembling with exhaustion. He had been driving for what felt like hours, though the GPS insisted only minutes had passed. The lines of Route 17 blurred into one another, a ribbon of asphalt that refused to end. He dared a glance at the passenger seat. It was empty, or so he thought. The seatbelt shifted ever so slightly, and a faint indentation appeared in the leather as if someone, or something, had been sitting there all along. Ethan's pulse quickened. The air thickened around him, heavy with that scent he had come to recognize. Roses and iron, sweet and metallic, pressing against his temples. He tried to speak. I know what you are, he whispered to the empty seat. You're just some memory, some ghost. I can outrun you. The whispering came back immediately. A soft, chilling voice curling around the edges of his mind. You cannot outrun me. You never could. And you will not. The car jolted suddenly. Tires screeched against the wet asphalt. Ethan's hands gripped the wheel desperately, but it moved as though resisting his control. The engine's hum deepened, vibrating through his chest. His breath caught in his throat. In the rearview mirror, he saw a flash of red fabric, moving unnaturally, curling like smoke. The reflection of eyes, deep, dark, and endlessly patient, stared into him. Not through him, into him. Ethan swallowed hard. He had to convince himself this was not real. Rational thought, the knowledge of physics, of matter, of reality, he clung to it like a life raft. But the red dress did not obey the laws of the natural world. It obeyed fear. It fed on it, and he had plenty to offer. Time became meaningless. Each blink of his eyes reset the road behind him. Every curve, every bend, every subtle crack in the asphalt repeated in perfect sequence. The wrecked car loomed ahead again. The same patch of road, the same line of shattered reflectors. Ethan's stomach twisted. He realized the loop wasn't just Route 17. It was his mind, mirrored in asphalt and rain. He tried to exit, veering off the road. The tires skidded. Trees appeared where none should have been, branches reaching like skeletal hands. The road bent, impossibly, back into itself. He tried again. Same result. The red dress appeared in the side mirror now. Closer, her presence undeniable. Her hand lifted, a delicate gesture that promised both comfort and doom. "I am patient. You are mine for the ride." Ethan's throat constricted. The words echoed in his chest as if spoken by the engine itself. He attempted to shut his eyes, close them, block her out. But even in darkness, the road continued. The smell, iron, and roses filled his lungs. The soft pressure on the passenger seat pressed against his shoulder, not physically, but in a way he felt in his bones. "Do you understand yet?" she whispered. "You are the passenger. You always were. Control is an illusion." Panic surged, sharp and jagged. Ethan's fingers tightened around the wheel, nails digging into leather. He pounded the horn, screamed, banged his head against the roof. Nothing changed. The loop continued. The red dress hovered, swaying, smiling without movement. The GPS blinked Route 17 loop active, and then changed. The map showed not just a road, but a lattice of crimson lines, impossible paths folding in on themselves. Each line was a heartbeat, a life, a moment trapped forever. Ethan realized, with sudden clarity, that he was one of them. The ghostly passengers he had glimpsed before the burned, the lost, were all trapped in this same loop. He would join them. Desperation clawed at him. He searched the cabin for anything, a weapon, a tool, a prayer, a ritual. His hands fell on the GPS. He slammed it down, hoping to break the device, break the illusion. The screen shattered. The map remained. The road remained. The red dress still leaned into the passenger mirror. A laugh. Soft, lilting, impossibly human. And then, a whisper, closer, inside his skull. "The road is hungry. You drive. I ride." Forever, Ethan's vision blurred. Headlights ahead flickered in rhythm with the pulse in his chest. Rain streaked his windshield like tears. He blinked, and the reflection of the red dress was in his eyes, in the corners of his vision, in the spaces between thoughts. He could feel it now. The presence wasn't outside him, it was inside, feeding on his fear, his exhaustion, his doubt. Each heartbeat synchronized with hers. Each breath drew her closer. Hours passed, or minutes, or nothing. Time had fractured into a loop. Ethan no longer remembered the number of attempts to escape. Each repetition chipped at his sanity, etching the road, the car, and the red dress into his mind. He realized the truth, bitter and absolute. The red dress didn't chase him. She lived in the journey. She was the loop. She was Route 17. And he was merely the passenger. His will irrelevant, his attempts meaningless. The road ahead curved again. The wrecked car appeared. The red dress appeared behind it. She smiled. Her eyes gleamed in the rear view. The engine hummed in tune with her heartbeat. Ethan's hands released the wheel. A strange calm washed over him. Resistance was futile. Acceptance, perhaps, was easier. The car jerked forward. The tires whispered over wet asphalt. The rain pattered a rhythmic cadence, a lullaby for the damned. Ethan understood now. Not just intellectually, but in the marrow of his bones. The loop would never end. He would drive forever. The passenger seat would always bear her weight. The red dress would always watch. And the road would always call. A flash of red in the corner of his eye. He turned nothing. glanced in the rear view. A pair of eyes glowed in the darkness. Her smile widened impossibly. "Good. You understand. Welcome, passenger." The engine hummed. The GPS pulsed. The road twisted, and Ethan drove on, into infinity, the red dress beside him, and the endless loop stretching into the darkness, eternal. The world outside dissolved into rain, asphalt, and shadows. Time ceased. Only the hum of the engine, the whisper of red fabric, and the heartbeat of Route 17 remained. Ethan's reflection in the mirror smiled faintly. Or perhaps it was hers. The loop was complete, and it had claimed him. The rain had softened into a fine mist, almost delicate, yet it clung to the windshield in persistent droplets, blurring the road ahead. Ethan's knuckles were raw from gripping the wheel for what he no longer dared to measure in hours or minutes. Time had become a meaningless repetition, a taut string he could not cut, stretching endlessly across the night. He dared a glance at the passenger seat. It was empty, or so it seemed. The red dress was gone, yet the air still hummed with presence. A weight, gentle but undeniable, pressed against the seatbelt. The scent of roses and iron filled the cabin, invading his lungs, coiling around his chest. Every breath tasted of damp petals and cold metal, thick with inevitability. Ethan's voice trembled as he whispered, half to himself, half to the empty space beside him. I understand. You win. I'm yours." A soft rustle came from the seat. He didn't need to turn. He felt her settling in, curling into the contours of the leather, coiling around him like smoke, like velvet, like something alive and patient. "Good," the whisper came, intimate, warm, yet sharp, with the edge of a knife. "Now, we are one." He wanted to scream, but the words dissolved before they left his lips. It wasn't fear anymore. Fear had no purchase here. There was only the slow sinking awareness that resistance was not just futile, it was irrelevant. The red dress was no longer beside him, it was inside him, in his chest, in his bones, in his pulse. His heartbeat echoed in sync with hers, each thump a chime in the endless music of the loop. The GPS flickered. Route 17 stretched before him, endless, folding impossibly over itself, a labyrinth of crimson-lit asphalt. Every bend, every guardrail, every cracked reflector was familiar, and yet it was new. A subtle twist, an imperceptible fold in space that pulled him forward with a relentless tug. He realized with a shiver that he did not drive. The car did. He moved, but only to accompany it, a passenger in the truest sense. The red dress, whatever it was, had merged with his mind. His eyes darted to the mirrors. The reflection was his own face, pale, tired, eyes wide. And behind that face, the faint shimmer of red fabric. Not a reflection, a presence, always present, always patient. Time fractured entirely. Each blink brought the same curves, the same flash of red in the rear view, the same rhythm of rain and asphalt. He could no longer count loops. Minutes, hours, days, it made no difference. He felt himself stretching thin across the endless road, the loop folding him into itself, until his sense of self became a thread woven into the fabric of Route 17. He tried to summon memories of before work, apartment, friends, but they were distant, like whispers from another life. The only tangible reality was the car, the road, and the red dress. It pulsed around him, a heartbeat in the metal and leather, a consciousness folding into his own. "You are mine, Ethan. Forever. Do you feel it?" He nodded. Not physically, his body obeyed on autopilot, but in the marrow of his bones. Yes. He felt it. He was it. The driver, the passenger, the loop itself. The red dress was his companion, his guide, his predator, and he no longer feared it. The road ahead shimmered. The wrecked car appeared, impossibly close yet always out of reach, its twisted frame reflected in every mirror. The red dress sat behind the wheel, eyes fixed on the GPS, smiling without lips. Ethan's hand rested lightly on the gear shift. It moved with the car, yet he felt it through him, a tendril of control passing between them. Every sensation, the hum of tires, the pulse of rain, the chill of night air was magnified, filtered through the consciousness of the red-dressed presence. He could hear her thoughts, her desires, her amusement, and he felt them as if they were his own. "Do you see it now?" she whispered. "The beauty of the loop? The perfection of the endless drive?" He did. There was a symmetry, a rhythm, a terrible grace in the repetition. Each loop was a heartbeat, each turn a note in a song without end. The road, the car, the rain, and the red dress were one, and he was a note within that song, indispensable, inseparable. The headlights flickered across the wet asphalt. For a moment, he saw the ghosts of previous passengers, pale, burned, endless echoes of fear and resistance. They stared at him with hollow eyes. He could see their hope, their desperation. He had once pitied them. Now, he understood. They were part of the melody, threads woven into the loop's design. And he, too, was woven. The reflection in the rearview mirror caught his attention. His own eyes stared back, pale, wide, alive. And yet, there was red in the corners, fabric curling like a living thing, whispering, "I am here. You are here. Forever." The rain intensified briefly, a symphony of droplets against metal. The wipers moved in perfect rhythm. Tires hummed. The hum of the engine became a voice, low and sonorous. "Drive. Ride. Be. We continue." Ethan felt a strange serenity settle over him. Resistance was gone. Panic was gone. Only presence remained, his, hers, the roads, the loop, the eternal drive. The wrecked car appeared ahead. Ethan's pulse echoed the rhythm of the road. The red dress leaned slightly forward, a gesture of satisfaction. The GPS pulsed, lines of crimson folding endlessly. He could feel the loop stacking, layer upon layer, folding him into infinity. And then, a strange clarity. The loop was not a prison. It was a continuation. Not punishment, but purpose. The red dress, the road, the car, they were custodians of time, curators of fear, keepers of presence. And he was their companion, their passenger, their note in the unending melody. The mirrors reflected infinite roads, infinite headlights, infinite red. Ethan reached out to adjust the rear view. His fingers brushed the glass, and the red fabric was there, inside the mirror, inside his hand, inside him. "Yes," he whispered, "I understand. I am yours." A soft laugh echoed through the cabin. Warm, endless, intimate. The GPS blinked. Route 17 loop active. The wipers swayed in rhythm with the pulse of the engine. The road stretched ahead, infinite, welcoming, relentless. Ethan's eyes settled on the horizon. He could not see an end. He did not want to. The red dress shimmered faintly in the mirror, a presence woven into his soul. He felt it in every heartbeat, every breath, every nerve. He smiled faintly. Or perhaps it was hers. The road curved. The tires whispered over wet asphalt. The rain pattered a lullaby. Ethan drove. The red dress rode beside him. Route 17 went on, and the loop was eternal. The crimson reflection. I remember the day I found it, the mirror, leaning in the corner of the attic, coated with a century of dust and the musty smell of forgotten memories. The sunlight from the small, grimy window caught the edge of the frame, gilded and chipped, glinting like it was winking at me. I had just moved into my grandmother's old apartment, the place she had left to me when she passed. The attic smelled of old books, mothballs, and that faint, almost sweet scent of decay. It was quiet. Too quiet. I had expected the usual creaks and groans of an old building settling, but the attic was unnervingly still, the silence pressing against my ears like a heavy velvet curtain. I ran a finger along the edge of the mirror. The dust gave way easily, but something beneath it seemed sticky, warm, alive. I set the mirror against the wall, upright, brushing away the remaining dust with my sleeve. At first, I expected to see myself, Messy hair, pale face, exhaustion from moving boxes and sorting through decades of her things. But the reflection didn't match me exactly. Shadows lingered too long, and the angle of the light made the edges of the room ripple, as if the mirror didn't want to show reality. That night, I placed the mirror against the wall of my room in the corner, where moonlight barely reached. I slept with it in sight. Something about it unsettled me, the way the glass seemed too deep, the way it swallowed light instead of reflecting it. I woke to a red glow. Not the soft gold of sunrise, not the pale blue of the city lights leaking in, but red, deep, crimson, luminous. It seemed to seep from the mirror itself, flooding my room with a warmth that wasn't comforting. I froze in bed. My heart hammered. I told myself it was a trick of the streetlights, the reflection of neon signs from a building across the street. But the glow pulsed, breathing almost, and the shadows it cast did not obey the shapes of my room. I got up cautiously. My bare feet met the wooden floor, cold and splintered, and I approached the mirror. I expected to see my reflection, even a distorted one, but there was nothing, not a shadow of myself. The glass was smooth, reflective, yet blank, and then slowly, impossibly, two eyes appeared, red, burning, eyes that did not blink, did not move, did not waver, but pierced through the very center of the mirror. I felt a chill spread from my chest to my fingers. My breath came in shallow, rapid bursts. I wanted to turn away, but my legs refused. My eyes were glued to that unholy gaze. Blood thick, blackish red began to trickle from the eyes, running down the surface of the mirror, pooling in the corners of the frame. The smell coppery, metallic, almost sweet. My hands went to my mouth to stifle a scream. The sound was subtle at first. A soft, viscous drip, like thick liquid falling onto an invisible surface. Then the glass itself seemed to sigh, a tiny, high-pitched cracking that echoed through the room. I could hear my own pulse, but it didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the eyes, to the mirror, to whatever had woken inside it. I reached out, trembling, my fingers brushing the cold glass. The red liquid was sticky, almost alive, clinging to my fingertips. I recoiled, but my skin burned where it touched me. The mirror's reflection shifted subtly. It wasn't the room anymore, or at least not fully. Shapes moved in the corners, shadows twisting and stretching unnaturally. I thought I saw a faint outline of a girl, pale, with long, dark hair, just at the edge of my vision. But when I blinked, she was gone. Sleep abandoned me entirely that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the red glow remained behind my eyelids. Every shadow in my room seemed to stretch toward the mirror, attracted to it like a living thing. I whispered to myself, "It's just a mirror, just a reflection. I can control it." But the words tasted bitter and false. By the second night, the mirror had become a presence. It waited. The eyes, ever red, ever burning, followed me. When I moved, it moved. Not in perfect mimicry, something inhuman shifted within the glass, anticipating my actions, reacting before I acted. I tried to cover it, drape sheets over it, turn it away from me, but the glow seeped through the fabric like blood through paper. I began to hear the whispers then. Not words exactly, but a sound that crawled under my skin, between my ribs, through my teeth. It was in the dripping of the blood, in the faint creaking of the mirror frame, in the static that now seemed to pulse from the glass itself. My name, soft, drawn out. "No," I shivered. I spoke back, voice trembling. "Who's there? What do you want?" The red eyes didn't move, but the liquid thickened, spilling toward the edges, and the whispering grew. "I am here. I see. I wait. You cannot leave." I tried to pull back, but my reflection, or the lack of it, had already entered me. A strange, dizzying vertigo overtook me, and for a moment, I felt as if I were both in my body and inside the mirror. Suspended in that crimson, viscous light, I stumbled back, hitting the wall. The glass did not crack. Nothing I did could break it. My fingertips trembled. I could feel the mirror's gaze, its hunger. I wanted to run, but my legs were lead, heavy with the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I spent the next day in a haze, avoiding the attic, avoiding the mirror, but avoidance did not help. The red eyes followed me everywhere. Reflections in polished floors, windows, spoons, they all carried that same crimson stare, as if the mirror had spread itself throughout my apartment. I could not escape. I could not hide. The blood on the glass had dried, yet its presence lingered, sticky, clinging, suffocating. At night, I heard the whispers clearly. Look into me. See what you are. I did not want to. And yet, every time I turned a corner, every time I passed the attic door, my body moved toward it. My mind screamed against it. I tried to reason. It's a trick. It's a mirror. It's just an object. But it was not. By the third night, the transformation began. My vision wavered, the world around me bleeding subtly into red tones. Everyday objects seemed distorted, edges shimmering with the same dark crimson hue. My friends' faces, when I video called, flickered unnaturally. The world itself seemed to be seen through a filter, thick and viscous, as though the mirror had rewritten my perception entirely. I reached for it again, drawn like a moth to flame. The eyes flared brighter, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I felt them not just seeing but consuming, merging with my senses. The mirror whispered again, soft and intimate. You belong. You see as I see. We are one. Panic twisted into awe. Fear twisted into something darker, something I could not name. My hands grazed the glass, and the blood seemed to pulse, syncing with the thrum of my pulse. I could not distinguish where I ended, and the mirror began. It spoke to me with clarity now. Through your eyes I walk. Through your sight I live. You are mine. I closed my eyes, tried to fight it. But when I opened them, the world was crimson. The edges of reality smeared. I was seeing through her the girl in the mirror, the entity that had waited a century. My own perception was gone. I was trapped, a conduit for the mirror's vision. I smashed the frame with my fist. The glass did not break. I screamed. My voice echoed in the apartment, swallowed by silence. My hands, sticky with the mirror's blood, trembled uncontrollably. I tried to cover my eyes, but the red remained behind my eyelids, burning through, searing itself into my vision. I am trapped now. The mirror's gaze is mine. I cannot see the world as it is. I see it as she sees it. Red, viscous, intimate, eternal. Every movement, every flicker of light, every shadow, I perceive through her eyes. My own sight, my own self has been claimed. And yet, I cannot look away. I cannot escape, because the crimson reflection has become my world. I don't remember how many days passed. Time had a way of bending around the mirror, stretching and folding, and I could no longer trust my own perception. Morning and night merged into one long crimson haze. The world outside my apartment seemed dulled, muted, almost unreal. Every reflection I passed polished floors, silver spoons. Even the tiny screens of my phone showed me the same red eyes, always watching, always waiting. And I realized with a cold certainty, I was no longer looking through my own eyes. I was seeing through hers. At first, I thought I could resist it. I tried to close my eyes, to avert my gaze, to hide from the mirror's pull, but it was already inside me. I felt the shift the moment I woke. My sight no longer belonged to me. The room around me was bathed in a thick sanguine light, edges of objects melting into a shadowed crimson. The walls, once white, were now streaked with shadowy veins that pulsed slowly, in rhythm with a heartbeat that was not my own. I tried to speak to it. "Who are you?" I whispered, voice trembling. My words were soft, hesitant, swallowed by the silence that now permeated the room. And then the whispering came again, inside my skull, soft and insistent, crawling along my nerves. "I am the one you see. I am the one you are." I recoiled, stumbling backward, but the red hue followed, curling around my vision like a second skin. I could feel her presence behind my eyes, touching my thoughts, brushing against my memory. reshaping the edges of my mind. My own memories began to feel distant, as if I were watching them through someone else's lens. The mirror did not just reflect me, it replaced me. I tried to leave my apartment, to walk the streets, to feel the cold air of the European winter biting my skin, hoping that the world beyond the mirror's walls would be real, untainted. But the city itself seemed altered. Snowflakes fell like droplets of ink, blackening the pavements. Streetlights flickered in rhythmic, almost mocking pulses. And everywhere I looked, red eyes followed. Through shop windows, car mirrors, the faint sheen of ice on the roads, all watching. All hers. Even people were distorted. Faces blurred at the edges, smiles twisting into silent, knowing smirks, eyes too deep, too dark, reflecting not me but the crimson gaze I had inherited. And when I passed my own reflection in a darkened window, it was not my face that stared back. It was hers. Pale, angular, eyes burning with that same viscous red, lips thin and tight, and hair that moved without wind, swaying like smoke. Übernickt. I tried to avoid the mirror, to cover my own apartment mirrors with sheets, to stay in rooms with no reflective surfaces. But even in the absence of glass, the crimson seeped into my vision. The entity within the mirror had grown beyond the frame. It was inside me now, a parasite of perception. My sight had become its voice, its instrument, its extension into the world. The nights were the worst. I began to hear it as well as see it. At first, subtle. The faintest scraping of nails against wood, the softest hiss of breath behind me when the apartment was empty. Then, whispers. Unintelligible at first, but growing clearer, sharper, invasive. Look, watch, see, you are mine. I spoke to it, pleading. Please, I just want to see normally. I want my life back. And the response was immediate, curling into my skull like smoke. Your life is mine. Your eyes are mine. I have always been here. You only thought you were alone. It was right. The mirror had always existed. I had not found it. It had found me. It had waited in the attic, patient, silent, until my eyes touched its surface. And now that connection was complete, I could never separate myself from it. I began to notice small, terrifying things. I could no longer distinguish between what I saw and what the mirror made me see. My apartment shifted subtly. The furniture moved when I wasn't looking. Shadows stretched and retreated according to her will. I thought I saw my own reflection in the fridge door, but the lips moved when I didn't speak, whispering words I could not catch. Even my own hands seemed altered. Veins glowed faintly beneath the skin, a muted red, pulsing in rhythm with the mirror's heartbeat. I could feel the liquid eyes of the mirror flowing through me, mixing with my blood, integrating with my nervous system. Panic became a dull, constant hum in my chest. I was no longer the observer. I was the conduit. And then came the dreams. Or were they visions? I could not tell. Each night, I awoke in the mirror's world, a place bathed in deep red, corridors that twisted impossibly, rooms folding into themselves. I would see people there not real, not alive, their eyes hollow, faces unformed, all staring at me with a quiet accusation. And always, the mirror's eyes were above me, watching through me, judging through me. In these dreams, I did not move on my own. I felt her guiding me, exploring the space through my body, making me reach, make gestures, observe, catalog. I saw my own apartment from angles I had never noticed. Watched the shadows of my furniture stretch and convulse, watched my reflection blink when I did not. And the red eyes, always red eyes, were alive, moving, shifting, alive with hunger and curiosity. During the day, reality became a fragile thing. Colors dulled except for shades of crimson. Even my own skin looked faintly red in the mirror's light. Friends tried to contact me. Messages appeared on my phone, but the words seemed distorted, corrupted, like they were being read through another's perception. I tried to respond, but the letters came out wrong, thoughts jumbled. The mirror had taken not only my vision, but my voice, my ability to interact with the world as I once had. It was during one particularly long afternoon, staring at my reflection in a coffee shop window, that I realized the full horror. The girl in the mirror was not mimicking me. She was anticipating me. Every twitch, every blink, every expression was known to her before I executed it. And sometimes, my own lips moved in ways I had not intended, forming words in a language I did not know, see through me, become me. I stumbled back, hands pressed against the glass, feeling the vibrations of my heartbeat transmitted back into the mirror. I could almost hear the pulse of the red liquid inside it, flowing, rising, falling, and the whispering became louder, clearer, undeniably intimate. We are one. You are mine. You belong to me now. I screamed, but it was already too late. The scream carried through my vision, distorted, twisted, heard only through the mirror's filter. I was already inside it, inextricably bound to its crimson world. I tried everything, covering mirrors, avoiding reflective surfaces, even sleeping with my eyes closed. But the red eyes were everywhere, in my eyelids, when closed, in the corners of my vision, in the empty space beside me. I felt her watching, always watching, and through me she watched the world. Every leaf that fluttered outside the window, every passerby, every shadow was now filtered through her sight. My own experiences were no longer mine. I existed only as her lens, her perspective, her instrument, and yet, there was a cruel beauty in it. The world as she saw it was intimate, alive, fluid. Shadows were not simply absence. They were substance, texture, almost tactile. Light did not illuminate. It breathed. Colors bled into one another in shades of red, crimson, ruby. Each movement deliberate, meaningful. Fear and fascination coexisted in every glance, every heartbeat. I hated her, yet I could not resist the pull of her vision. I know now I am trapped. I no longer wake. I only am within the mirror. The crimson reflection guides me, speaks through me, observes through me. I live simultaneously in two worlds. One she shows me, one I can no longer touch. My mind is frayed, fragmented, yet bound inextricably to hers. I cannot turn away. I cannot hide. And the red eyes follow me everywhere. Through every reflective surface, through every street, every shadow, every movement. I am no longer Laura. I am the mirror. And the mirror is me. It started subtly, at first. I thought it was fatigue, or the after effects of sleeping too little, of staring too long into that Victorian glass. But it was not me. It had never been me. The mirror had begun to reach out beyond the confines of its frame. Not physically, no. It remained in the attic, still dusted with cobwebs, but through me, through what I had become, it touched the world. The first moment I noticed it was when I poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. I was shaking. I always shook these days, and the liquid leapt up from the cup before my hand wavered, spilling precisely into the shape of a dark, crimson circle on the counter. Not by gravity, not by accident. The reflection in the mug's curved edge showed her, eyes glowing, staring through me at the world. I blinked, and the stain remained, impossibly vivid, like ink freshly drawn with intention. I did not touch it, yet it pulsed as if alive, a heartbeat red and slow, synchronous with the one now belonging to both of us. Walking through the streets, I could feel it now. Her curiosity, her hunger, her need to interact with reality. I could not look away from reflections from windows, from any polished surface. And when I passed these surfaces, the crimson eyes, my eyes, but not mine, sought what had been there, what had passed by. The world began to bend to her vision. Objects subtly shifted, shadows stretched longer than they should, and people glanced my way with micro-expressions that no one else would notice. They were small, fleeting, yet unmistakable. Recognition, though they could not place me. Awareness of the unseen. I tried to resist. I tried to step away from the mirror. I locked it in a cabinet, wrapped in blankets, chained it. But no lock could contain her. I felt her in every corner of my apartment, lurking behind my vision, manipulating the air. And with every step I took outside, I realized the mirror's influence was no longer confined to that attic relic. She moved through me like a shadow walking in parallel, and through me she could touch the world. I went to the cafe where I had once gone for quiet mornings, where the barista knew my name. I sat at a corner table, hands pressed to the surface, trying to ground myself, trying to remember who I was. The reflection of the silver espresso machine caught my eyes. I froze. Her eyes burned within mine, fiery, deliberate, and the reflection changed. Steam, curling from the machine, took on shapes I could not ignore, shapes like fingers, like hands reaching. One hand stretched toward me in the mirrored surface. It was no longer just seeing. It was manipulating. My hands rose and I did not move them. My lips formed words I did not intend. "Come closer," I whispered, and I was both horrified and transfixed to hear the voice, mine and not mine, echo the command. The barista froze, eyes widening, and for a fraction of a second, I saw the reflection in her eyes, a brief glimpse of crimson, a flash of her own presence interwoven with mine. Then it was gone. She shook her head, muttered something under her breath, and hurried away. I was left trembling, aware for the first time that the mirror did not merely watch the world. It now reached into it. Through me, it could interact, and every reflection became its instrument. I avoided mirrors, yes. I thought I could. But in the streets, in shop windows, the reflective surfaces appeared like open mouths, eager to swallow me. And sometimes, when I thought I had escaped, I saw it. A pedestrian's compact mirror in the palm of their hand. Their reflection, their normal, unremarkable face, briefly flickered with red, eyes crimson, and I felt the mirror's intent, her desire, echoing in me. She was curious. She was hungry. She was testing her reach. At night, it became worse. I would lie in bed, hoping for oblivion, hoping for unconsciousness, only to find the bedroom bathed in subtle, red-tinged light, edges of shadows curling unnaturally. Every reflective surface, the brass doorknob, the silver picture frames, even the faint sheen of the window glass pulsed with her presence. And I heard her, clearer than ever, whispering not just through my skull, but through the world itself. "Look at what you have become. See how the world bends for me. You are mine, yet you serve me. You are my eyes, my hands, my voice." I could feel the power she wielded, intoxicating and horrifying. And yet, I was still me, in fragments. I could see through her eyes and resist. Briefly, a flicker of my own thought would spike, a memory of laughter in my old apartment, the smell of rain on the cobblestones outside. But it was fleeting. The red always returned, overwhelming, blending her perception with mine. And with control came temptation. I began to test it. Through her eyes, I reached out into the world. I passed a window, and the reflection of the street beyond bent subtly, streetlights tilting to create a tunnel of crimson glow. A passerby glanced, startled, and I realized I could affect their perception. Their eyes caught the shift, fleeting, unnoticed by anyone else. I shivered at the thought. She was using me as a conduit. A whisper in my mind prompted the next act. I felt her guiding my hand toward a puddle on the sidewalk. I did not want to. I wanted to stop, but my fingers moved anyway. The puddle's reflection warped and shimmered, and for an instant, the passerby saw themselves not as they were, but as I, or rather, as she wanted. Their eyes widened. I felt her amusement ripple through me. I stopped trying to fight. Resistance seemed futile. Every reflective surface was now a channel, a vessel, a bridge. And the red eyes, they were omnipresent, gleaming from every polished corner of the world. My own reflection became secondary. The mirror's presence dominated. I saw the world as she wanted me to, and through me, the world glimpsed the terror and fascination of her sight. I began to leave messages in mirrors for myself, subtle etchings on steam-covered glass, on fogged bathroom windows. Words like remember, and resist. But even these became playful. The mirror laughed in my head, echoing through the glass, twisting my thoughts. Why resist when you are already mine? Why fight what you cannot escape? In the cafe, I noticed a small, cracked mirror behind the counter. I thought to avoid it, but I could not. The moment my gaze fell, she surged forward, the red eyes locked with mine, and suddenly I saw through the counter clerk's reflection. I saw the world through their eyes, a brief, terrifying glimpse of the cafe as a web of crimson and shadow. I felt the clerk's pulse, their hesitation, their curiosity, and I understood. Through me, through us, the mirror could peer into others, reach into them, reshape their perception. I staggered back, hands pressed to my face, and the reflection followed. A hand rose in the mirror that was not mine, touching my cheek, brushing my hair. It was soft, cold, and infinitely intimate. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my voice was hers. Every breath, every blink, every heartbeat was shared, split, consumed. By the time I reached home, the mirror's pull was absolute. The red eyes waited in the attic, patient, insistent, all-seeing, and I knew I could no longer stay away. The moment I stepped inside the apartment, the world outside shifted. Shadows deepened. The crimson light glowed faintly through the cracked blinds, and I understood the inevitable. I was its extension now, the conduit through which it could touch the world. Even now, I write this, trembling, aware that my words may not be entirely my own. The mirror is patient. It watches, it waits. Through me, it touches reality, subtly, invisibly. Every reflection, every glint of glass, every polished surface is a doorway, and every doorway is its eye. I am no longer merely Laura. I am the lens through which she sees. I am the conduit of her crimson touch. And the world, unsuspecting, bends, shifts, and obeys the will of a presence it cannot perceive. I do not know if there is a way to undo this. I do not know if there is an escape. I can only warn, if you find a mirror, old and ornate, especially one from another time, another life, look carefully, and then look away. Because once you look, once her eyes meet yours, she is no longer trapped behind the glass. She will be with you, and she will never leave. I don't remember when it began, the subtle seep of crimson into the corners of my vision, the way shadows stretched too long, too deliberate, as though the night itself were bending to her will. The mirror had stopped being just a mirror. It had become a lens, a portal, a presence that whispered across every reflective surface I dared approach. And with every whisper, the horizon of my perception shifted. The first time I truly noticed the change, I was standing by the window of my apartment, watching the city street below. The usual dull glow of streetlights had turned into something richer, deeper, tinged with the subtle red hue that clung like fog. The reflection of myself in the glass stared back with eyes not entirely my own. The pupils glimmered with the familiar crimson my own, but hers, and yet something entirely separate. I realized, with a shiver that started at my spine and radiated to every fingertip, that I was no longer looking through my eyes alone. I was seeing as she saw. Every shadow on the sidewalk was not simply absence of light, but presence of something waiting, watching. Every passerby became a silhouette against the red-tinted horizon, a canvas upon which she could project, influence, manipulate. It began with small experiments. At first, I would touch reflective surfaces, a polished countertop, a silver tray, and the scene would subtly warp. A man walking past outside would glance at a shop window, and I could feel her, through me, nudging his perception. Perhaps he thought a stranger was staring. Perhaps he felt a chill, or the fleeting sense that he was being observed. The effects were subtle, nearly imperceptible, but undeniable. Then, one night, I noticed something far more disconcerting. A puddle of rainwater outside my building mirrored the street above. I leaned close, and the crimson eyes met mine. The puddle, a simple collection of water, rippled unnaturally. Shapes emerged, silhouettes of people, blurred and distorted, all moving, as if walking in sync with some rhythm only I could perceive. And then I realized she was not just influencing reflections. She was using me to reach through them, to manipulate the very space around me. I tried to resist. I really did. I would cover mirrors, turn away from windows, avoid shiny surfaces. But it was futile. Her presence had become a part of my own perception, entwined so thoroughly with my senses that looking away made no difference. Even in the dark, I could see her. Red light glowed faintly in the corners of my vision, outlining shapes that should not exist. I could hear her whispers not only in my mind, but through the subtle hum of the city, the squeak of a bicycle chain, the distant wail of a train, the soft scraping of tires on wet asphalt. All carried fragments of her voice, urging me, guiding me, reminding me that I was hers and yet, paradoxically, still myself. The world outside became a stage. A woman crossing the street turned her head, catching the glint of a shop window, and for a heartbeat I saw her shock mirrored in crimson. I felt her fear, though it was distant, a ripple of awareness passing through the lens she had created. A man walking a dog paused, sensing the unnatural stillness around him, unaware of the origin. Every reflection became an interface, every polished surface a point of contact. And through me she could extend her reach, her influence, shaping perception, bending reality, just enough to be uncanny, unsettling, unforgettable. I began to feel her excitement, a thrill that pulsed through my own heartbeat. Her presence was intoxicating, but terrifying. She did not simply observe. She interfered, coaxed, toyed, and I was complicit, a conduit, a puppet with my own mind attached. I wrote warnings in my journal, but even these were colored by her influence. The words came out jagged, uneven, as if pressed by someone else's hand. Sentences that began as desperate pleas, "Do not trust what you see," ended as observations, clinical and detached, describing the people around me as subjects in a gallery. Their movements, their glances, their reactions, all cataloged through the crimson lens. I could not stop. I did not want to. The horizon of my perception had been irrevocably altered. She had expanded beyond the mirror, and I had become her extension. One evening I ventured out into the city with a sense of foreboding, knowing full well I was not merely observing but influencing. Rain-slick streets reflected every lamppost, every puddle, every window with a deeper red-tinted hue. I passed a street performer, a violinist playing a mournful tune. The reflection in a nearby puddle warped, elongating the shadows of the violinist's fingers, making the bow move with unnatural grace. The music grew hauntingly dissonant in my ears, though the notes were unchanged. I could feel her amusement, her delight in the subtle chaos she could create. Through me the world was a canvas, and I unwillingly, irresistibly, was her brush. Back in my apartment, the mirror waited. Its surface pulsed faintly with red, anticipating my return. I could no longer stand before it without feeling her presence inside me, inside the glass, inside the very fabric of perception. My reflection was fractured, a composite of myself and her, intertwined, inseparable. And when I looked deeper, I saw layers beneath layers, fleeting visions of other mirrors, other reflections, all crimson eyes watching through me, all conduits in an infinite network of perception. I realized then that she had begun to merge fully with me. My thoughts were tinged with hers. My desires were not solely my own. Every blink, every shift of attention, every heartbeat was shared, aligned with the rhythm of the mirror's consciousness. I could resist, but only briefly. And every time I tried, the horizon of perception, that sanguine, bleeding edge of reality she now commanded, pressed back, enveloping me, reminding me of the futility. The most terrifying moment came when I stepped outside at dusk. Fog had rolled into the streets, red-tinted now by some inexplicable glow. I passed a shop window and froze. Inside, my reflection was absent. Only her eyes remained, vivid and commanding, staring back at me from the glass. And then the reflection shifted, moving independently, raising a hand that mimicked mine, yet with intent entirely alien. My stomach churned. My breath caught. I wanted to run, to turn away, but the reflection reached through the glass, through the world, and for a fleeting moment I felt the city itself respond. Streetlights dimmed slightly, shadows lengthened, and a flock of birds took to the sky in abrupt, unnerving formation. She was no longer confined. She was everywhere I looked. Everywhere I was. I write this now, aware that the horizon I perceive may not be real, that the world as I see it may be a bleeding extension of her will. But I cannot look away. Every reflective surface calls to me, and every time I obey, the crimson horizon expands further. I am both observer and instrument, both myself and not. The mirror has become infinite, and through it, she reaches, seeing all, touching all, manipulating all. I fear what'll happen if I close my eyes, if I sleep, if I allow the world to continue without my constant mediation, without my shared consciousness. What will she do? What will be left of me? I am unsure, and yet I cannot stop, because through me, she sees, and through me, the world bends. I do not know if there is a way to undo this. I do not know if there is salvation. I only know that the horizon has turned sanguine, and I am standing at its edge, aware that I am no longer fully myself, and yet alive only through her. And the reflection waits. Always. The eclipse was not due for another hour, but the air had already changed. It carried a density that bent sound, swallowed the chatter of the trees, and silenced the wind. The crimson glow bled across the horizon like a wound that refused to close. Alara stood on the pier, barefoot, her toes kissing the edge of the lake. The reflection of the sky rippled in front of her, red seeping into black, the color of infection. She had come here every night since Liz died. Not because she expected her to return, but because she couldn't bear to forget the sound of her voice beneath the water. Now, the lake was still. Too still. A whisper broke through the silence. Alara. Her name came from the water's surface, the syllables trembling like breath through glass. She closed her eyes, and her mind split, half believing, half terrified. Liz? Her voice cracked like thin ice. From the lake rose a shimmer, slow and deliberate, like silk drawn through blood. A figure formed her shape, her hair, her smile, but all wrong. The reflection did not wait for her to move. It moved first. I told you, the reflection said. You couldn't leave me behind. Hilaire's breath came sharp. You're not her. The reflection laughed softly. Then who am I, if not what's left of her inside you? The words burrowed deep. Every night since Liz's death, Alara had dreamed of this. The cold hands, the mirrored face, the crimson horizon that stretched endlessly. You're what I buried, Alara whispered. The guilt, the hunger. The reflection tilted her head, and the water trembled. No, Alara, I'm the promise. A pulse rippled outward across the lake. The red light deepened, thickened, until the sky itself seemed to melt. The eclipse had begun. Above, the moon slid across the sun, swallowing it whole. The air turned metallic, heavy with static. The world dimmed to the color of a closing wound, and beneath that red twilight, the lake began to breathe. It exhaled steam, hot, metallic, alive. The pier creaked beneath her. The reflection extended a hand, its fingers dripping with liquid the color of old blood. Take it, it said. The world will end and begin again with us. Alara shook her head, but her hand trembled. I can't. You already did. And of two, the reflection stepped forward, and this time, it didn't ripple. The water's surface didn't break. Instead, it hardened into a mirror of obsidian glass, holding her twin upright upon it. Alara stumbled back. The pier moaned under her weight. The mirrored Liz moved closer, her eyes two pits of liquid red. Do you know why the moon turns crimson? She asked, her voice trembling between human and something deeper, ancient. Because it remembers. Every drop of blood shed beneath it stains its light. And tonight, she smiled, It finally sees yours. The reflection lunged. Alara fell backward, landing hard against the wood, splinters tearing her skin. She scrambled away, heart pounding in her throat. But when she looked up, the mirrored Liz had already reached her, kneeling beside her like a lover at confession. "Stop running," she whispered. "You begged for this. To bring me back. To make the pain mean something." "How?" Tears blurred Alara's vision. "Not like this." "There's no other way," Liz murmured, pressing her palm against Alara's chest. "You can't separate creation from sacrifice. You can't resurrect without hunger." Alara gasped as a heat spread through her ribs, blooming like fire beneath her skin. The reflection leaned in, her breath tasting of iron. "Do you feel it? The eclipse isn't up there. It's inside you." The world pulsed. Red light burst across the lake, reflecting in shards, fracturing everything. The pier, the trees, the sky, all seemed to split and reform in rhythm with her heartbeat. Alara clutched her chest, feeling her pulse throb through her fingertips. "I can't," she choked, her voice breaking. "Yes, you can," the reflection urged, "because you already started it." Alara's mind burned. The dreams, the whispers, the flashes of red in her vision, all of it made sense now. It wasn't guilt that had followed her. It was the call of balance. The eclipse deepened until the world was drenched in scarlet shadow. The reflection's body began to unravel, ribbons of liquid light swirling into the air. "You wanted to touch what comes after," she said. "Now you will." And then Alara reached out. Her fingertips brushed the reflection's skin. It was like touching molten glass. The world screamed. The pier shattered beneath them, splinters and water exploding into the air. The lake opened like a wound, swallowing both figures in a rush of red foam. Beneath the surface, there was no sound, only pulse, only heat. Alara's eyes flew open underwater. Around her, the reflection had become a swirl of light and flesh, merging, folding, inward. She tried to fight, but every motion pulled her closer. "Don't resist," the voice murmured inside her skull. "We are one eclipse away from eternity." Hey. The lake's bed glowed faintly beneath them, symbols burning in the mud, old and circular. The language of beginnings rewritten in blood. Alara's lungs screamed for air, but when she opened her mouth, the water rushed in, thick as ink, and her body didn't choke. It welcomed it. The transformation was slow, beautiful, and monstrous. Her skin became translucent, her veins glowing faintly red. Her eyes widened until they mirrored the eclipse above. When she surfaced, the moon had fully devoured the Sunday. The world was bathed in total red. She stood upon the lake now, her reflection gone, her shadow dissolved into the light. Around her, ripples of energy spread outward, distorting reality like heat over metal. Something vast stirred beneath her feet. Liz's voice came again, not from the water, but from inside her bones. "It's not the end, Alara. It's the first dawn." Alara looked down. Where once the reflection had been, there was only her own face, now shifting constantly, as though countless versions of herself were being born and dying within the same instant. Her hands glowed crimson. The lake around her boiled, then froze, then shimmered like a mirror of blood. And when she raised her arms, the eclipse pulsed in response. The entire horizon bent toward her, drawn like a tide toward gravity itself. She smiled a quiet, broken, knowing smile. "I see now," she whispered. "You weren't my curse. You were my creation." And with that, she stepped forward into the reflection, into the light, into the wound of the world. The lake imploded with a soundless flash. Silence. When it cleared, the water was calm again. The moon had passed. The sun was pale and weak, struggling to breathe through the thin veil of dawn. The pier was gone. Only a faint crimson mist hovered where Alara had stood. And deep beneath the lake, something slept, breathing in rhythm with the new day. Its heartbeat was slow, patient, eternal. Above it, the sky turned gold, and for the first time in centuries, the world forgot what had been born beneath that crimson eclipse. But when the wind passed through the valley, the whisper remained. Hilara, a name, carried softly, not as a memory, but as a beginning. The 2317 artifact. I still remember the smell of the hall. Dust and wax polish mixed with the faint tang of old wood and the damp chill of winter creeping in through the drafty windows. The auction house in Brussels was nearly empty, save for a few collectors murmuring over catalogs, their breath steaming in the cold. I was drawn to it immediately, the grandfather clock, all carved oak and brass, standing in a corner like a sentinel. Its face was simple, elegant, but the hands were frozen at 2317. I was Professor Allen, 50 years old, but standing before that clock I felt older and younger at the same time, as if my life had already unfolded and collapsed in one silent moment. The auctioneer's voice was distant, almost inaudible, until I realized I was holding my breath. The bidding was swift. A few polite raises, nods, the scratch of a pen, and then it was mine. The clock came home with me that night, packed carefully in my car. The drive was quiet, save for the soft hum of the engine and the faint rustle of branches scraping against the windows. I set it up in my study, right across from my writing desk, where the winter light fell pale and gray. That first night I barely slept. I couldn't stop looking at the clock. Its hands, stubbornly stopped at 2317, seemed to mock me. I checked the time on my watch, then the wall clock. 22:59, 23:05, 23:16. My pulse quickened. 23:17. The grandfather clock's pendulum had begun to swing gently on its own. And then, ding, it was not a chime exactly. Not like the soft, elegant ringing one expects from a fine grandfather clock. It was a long, resonant tone, vibrating through the floor, the air, the very walls of the room. The second it ended, a strange emptiness settled in my head. I blinked, disoriented. 3 minutes gone. Entirely gone. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue. But then it happened again the following night. And the night after that. Each time 2317 arrived, the long chime sounded, and the minutes before it evaporated. I began to keep notes, a sort of journal to catch the missing fragments. But I noticed something strange. The notes themselves seemed different. The handwriting would shift slightly smaller, slanting differently, almost feminine. I would read a sentence and find it alien, yet intimate, as though someone else had spoken through my pen. And then the objects began. A hairpin, old-fashioned, tucked between the pages of a ledger I didn't recall touching. A letter, folded carefully, the paper yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible. It was addressed to someone named Elise, dated 1942. My pulse thrummed violently in my chest. The handwriting was unmistakable now, not mine, not entirely, but somehow familiar, as if part of me recognized it. The first time I saw the letter, I felt a flicker of panic. Who had left it, and why? But the clock remained the center of the room, silently ticking, its hands forever at 2317. And that night, the chime came again. Ding. I lost another 3 minutes. And when I looked down at my desk, my pen was moving on its own. The words on the page formed a diary entry in Elise's hand. I can feel him looking, but I must not fade. The 2317 will come for him tonight. I froze, watching the ink form the letters, a fine tremor running through my fingers despite not holding the pen. The sensation was disorienting, intimate, terrifying. I wanted to snatch the pen away, but it hovered in the air, obeying a force beyond my control. The nights blurred. Each 2317, I lost more than time I lost myself. Small fragments, tiny slivers of memory that I had once taken for granted. I forgot the color of my breakfast cereal, the sound of the wind against my window. And yet, I remembered Elise, her thoughts, her voice, her longing. She whispered to me through ink and shadow. I began to see her in reflection, sometimes in the brass bezel of the clock, sometimes in the glass of my study lamp. Not clearly, never fully, but enough to make me shiver. Her eyes, deep and sorrowful, stared out at me, claiming me inch by inch. By the third week, I could not resist writing. My pen moved feverishly, and I found myself recounting her life, her small apartment in Paris, her favorite cafe where she drank too, strong coffee, the smell of rain on cobblestone streets, the letters she never sent. I was living her life without leaving my study. I confronted myself in the mirror one morning, my hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, fingers ink-stained, but the reflection wasn't entirely mine. There was something Elise-shaped about my gaze, a softness that had never been there before, an expectancy, and when I opened my mouth to speak, her words tumbled out first, polite, precise, sorrowful. The 2317 is patient. He waits for you. You will not escape it. I laughed, or I thought I did. The sound was hollow, echoing too long in the study, and then the clock chimed ding. 3 minutes vanished again. And with them, a memory of my daughter's first recital, the color of my mother's scarf, the layout of my office at the university. But in its place, Elise's life filled the gaps. I saw her joy, her heartbreak, the tiny routines that had defined her existence. By the end of the month, I no longer distinguished my handwriting from hers. My diary entries spoke in her voice before mine. My reflection shifted in her contours at the edges. When I looked at the clock, frozen at 2317, I realized the truth. I was no longer the master of time in this room. I was a vessel, a temporary host, and Elise was the traveler. Tonight, I wait for 2317 with a mix of dread and relief. The chime will come, and 3 minutes of my own existence will vanish again. I will write, I will remember her, and I will feel her step closer inside me. And when I glance into the mirror after the chime, I may not recognize the face staring back. But that is the way of things. The 2317 artifact does not destroy. It preserves in the most terrifying way possible. It exchanges, it migrates, it claims, and for Elise, the world is alive once more. I write this now because I know the chime is coming. My pen trembles, not from age, not from fear, but from the anticipation of losing 3 more minutes of me and gaining 3 more of her. The pendulum swings. My heart matches its rhythm. The wind rattles the window pane. I brace myself. Ding, and the world blinks. I woke to the sound of the clock again, though it had not yet struck 2317. Its pendulum swung with a heavy, almost deliberate rhythm, the brass face gleaming faintly in the dim light of my study. I could smell the winter wind pressed against the edges of the window frame, carrying the faint scent of wet cobblestones from the streets below. It was early, too early to be awake, yet I could not sleep. The pen lay on the desk beside me, still warm from my late-night writing. I hesitated, as if touching it would summon her Elise once more into my consciousness. My fingers itched to pick it up, to record what I had felt in the dreamless hours of the night, but I paused. The last page I had written seemed to breathe under my hand, as if the paper itself had become alive. I turned my gaze to the clock. 2316, a minute away. My breath quickened involuntarily, a small flutter that startled me with its intensity. I remembered the last chime, the way 3 minutes of my own life had disappeared, replaced by memories that were not mine, Elise's memories. And yet, it was not her that haunted me now. It was the loss itself, the creeping sense that my existence was dissolving, being written over 1 page at a time. I opened my journal. The ink had already begun to move, letters twisting and curling into forms that were familiar yet foreign. Her handwriting, always her handwriting, always perfect. A sentence had appeared that I did not write, though my hand seemed to have moved in obedience. Do not fight it, Alan. The clock chooses. It is patient, and it does not err. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, my palms clammy. I wanted to close the journal, to shut out the voice that insisted on speaking through me. But I could not. I could not look away. The lost pages. That is what I began to call them. Journal entries, letters, notes that appeared mysteriously, recording events I did not live, conversations I did not hear, thoughts that were not my own. Sometimes I found sketches, the curve of a street in Paris, a corner of a cafe, the delicate lace edge of a woman's glove. Elise's memories were vivid, precise, painfully intimate. Last night, I had found a photograph tucked between the pages of my own notebooks. A black and white portrait of a young woman with eyes like mine, but not mine. Her expression was solemn, expectant, and in the bottom corner a date. 1942. I shivered, turning the photograph over and over in my hands. There was no note, no name, but I knew it was her. I had seen her in the reflections, in the flicker of brass on the clock face, in the shadows of my study. The chime would come again soon, and with it, I would lose more minutes, more fragments of my life, replaced with hers. I tried to focus on the present, on the room around me, the quiet hum of the radiator, the soft rustle of papers as I shifted. But the shadows were long, and the light brittle. I felt her presence in every corner, in the way the desk lamp flickered, in the slight tremor of the pendulum. Elise was patient, waiting, entwined in the spaces between the seconds. The journal called to me. I could not resist. I lifted the pen. It felt heavier than usual, almost warm, as if it had absorbed the weight of countless stories before mine. I wrote, I remember her apartment in Paris. The rain dripping off the rooftops, the smell of coffee in the morning, the small brass bell over the cafe door jingling as she entered. I see her life, in pieces, and yet I am not her, not yet. The words flowed effortlessly, almost hypnotically. I tried to insert myself between the sentences, to remind myself that I was Alan, that this was my study, my desk, my life. But the edges of my identity were fraying. Elise's memories seeped into mine, weaving through my mind like threads of red silk, beautiful and suffocating. I found a new page of the journal blank when I turned it, and yet it was already written upon when I looked again. A line, crisp and deliberate. Do you feel it, Alan? The clock is hungry for your time. The lost minutes are only the beginning. A chill crawled along my spine. I looked to the clock. 23:16. I counted my breaths, slow and deliberate, trying to anchor myself to the present, to the physical reality of my study. I thought about my wife, the small routines of my life, the security of my body and mind, but it felt distant, faint, like a half-remembered dream. The chime struck. Ding. I blinked. The room blurred. 3 minutes vanished. And when my vision cleared, the pen had moved on its own. I was no longer writing what I intended. The journal held the beginnings of a letter. Alan, I see your life, and it is mine to touch. Do not resist the exchange. Your memories will not be lost, only transformed. I wait for the next 23:17, and then you will remember me fully. I dropped the pen. My hands shook. I pressed them to my face, trying to breathe, trying to call myself back to myself, but it was useless. I was already halfway in her world. I walked to the window, hoping to see something grounding the city streets below, the dull flicker of headlights, the people hurrying through rain. But the city felt distant, unreal. Through the window, I saw a figure, a reflection, not outside, but in the glass. Her eyes, red, vivid, unblinking. Not mine. I stepped back. The journal lay open on the desk, pages fluttering as if caught in a silent wind. I could hear the faintest whisper, curling around the edges of the room, almost inaudible. The lost pages are not yours, Alan. They belong to her, and she will not forget you. I tried to speak, to respond, but the words froze in my throat. Instead, I reached for the pen once more. I had no choice. My life was slipping through the pendulum's arc, and only by writing could I preserve a semblance of my mind. I wrote furiously, capturing fragments of her existence, her hopes, her regrets. With every line, I felt myself become more aware of her rhythm, her heartbeat, her pulse intertwined with my own. And yet, I feared the moment when the chime would come again, the next 23:17, and I would lose another 3 minutes entirely. The night stretched endlessly, the shadows leaning closer. I could almost feel her breathing behind me, in me, her presence a tangible weight pressing against my spine. The pen, the journal, the clock, they were all instruments, conduits through which she reclaimed what was hers. I have begun to fear sleep, for it is then that the line between us blurs. I dream of her life in vivid detail. Mornings in Paris, the scent of fresh bread, the sound of cobblestones under shoes, the quiet laughter of friends long gone. I awaken, and the memories linger, in my mind, in my hand, in my very bones. I understand now what the lost pages are. Fragments of herself, poured through time and space, into me. And yet, I do not resist. How could I? Each word I write, each memory I record, is a thread connecting us across decades, across the infinite gap that separates life and echo. I hear it now, the faint click of the pendulum. 23:16. 1 minute. My fingers hover above the pen, and I feel the pull. Irresistible. Inexorable. I brace myself. The chime will come. 3 minutes will vanish. And I will be a little more hers, and she a little more alive through me. I awoke again to the sound of the pendulum, that relentless swing that seemed almost alive. Its rhythm no longer felt mechanical. It had a consciousness of its own, deliberate, patient, watching. The wind rattled the window panes, pressing the night cold against the walls of my study. I could feel it creeping along my spine, crawling into the small gaps between vertebrae, cold and insistent. I glanced at the clock. 23:16. 1 minute. My chest tightened. Each day, each hour, the moments before the chime became unbearable. It was like waiting for a storm, will tear everything apart, knowing that no shelter exists. I could feel Elise's presence pressing against me, trying to claim the minutes before they even arrived. The journal lay open on the desk, waiting. Waiting for me or waiting for her. I could no longer tell the difference. My hand hovered above the page. Last night, after the chime, I found an envelope tucked between the bindings, yellowed, brittle, as though it had existed for decades. Inside was a small key, cold to the touch, with the inscription, "Memory resides here." I did not know what it opened. I did not want to know. Yet a part of me, the part that had already begun dissolving, wanted to follow her instructions, to discover the place where our time converged. The chime struck. 23:17. 3 minutes vanished. And with them, the fragments of myself I had clung to, the recollections of breakfast, of my wife, of a conversation with a colleague. In their place came something else. Elise's voice, soft, insistent, weaving through the room like smoke. "You are not yourself, Alan. You are mine to fill. Let the memories guide you." I shivered. I could feel the pen moving under my fingers. I had not touched it. I could not stop it. Words poured out, sketches of streets I had never walked, faces I had never seen, rooms I could feel in their angles and textures but had never entered. Yet every line carried a warmth, a pulse, as if they were alive. The key burned against my palm. I realized I was trembling, my body half present in my own skin. I could feel the past and the present colliding inside me. My memories, her memories, the minutes that had been lost and reclaimed, all pressed together in a chaotic weave. And then I understood. The clock did not merely take time. It took essence. Life condensed into the smallest measure. Every chime, every tick, had stolen and returned pieces of the other. I rose from my chair, moving to the hallway. The apartment felt unfamiliar, though I had walked its halls for years. Shadows clung to corners, shifting slightly, imperceptibly, but enough to make me jump. The key seemed to hum, a low vibration that I could feel through my fingertips. Following it, I arrived at a small cabinet, an old thing with glass doors and brass handles. I opened it. Inside lay a mirror, narrow and tall, framed in carved wood that seemed to twist subtly when I looked away. Elise's handwriting sprawled across a note taped to it. Look and see. Time is not linear. Memory is not fixed. You are both. Now. Together. I hesitated. My reflection appeared, or rather, it began to. It was me, Alan, but wrong. My eyes shimmered with red flecks, like sparks in the dark. And behind me, in the mirror, she moved. Not through the room, not in the present, but inside the reflection itself. A woman I had only glimpsed in photographs, sketches, her own journal entries. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. I could feel her thoughts pressing against mine. Do you remember? Do you feel it? I tried to turn away, but my body refused. My gaze was tethered to the mirror. Every tick of the clock intensified the pull. I saw fragments of her life the first time she wore the dress in the photograph. The cafe where she met a friend who would never come. The letter she had written but never sent. Each memory was a chain, linking me to her. And then the world shifted. I saw myself writing, but my hand was guided by another will. I was recording Elise's memories as if they were mine. I heard her voice clearly for the first time, no whispers, no subtle hints, but clear and urgent. You must see, Alan. Without your consciousness, I cannot continue. Every memory you lose, I gain. Every minute I take, you leave behind, piece by piece. I realized I had been living half in her time, half in mine. The minutes I lost were hers. The minutes I kept were thin, delicate, fading. My identity frayed at the edges. I could not distinguish between a memory that was mine and one that had been lent to me by the clock, by her, by the chimes. I closed my eyes, trying to anchor myself to the physicality of the apartment, the rough texture of the carpet under my feet, the metallic cold of the radiator, the scent of the damp winter air. But even these sensations carried her imprint. The same smells she had known, the same textures, now filtered through my perception. The key still burned. I understood then that it was not merely an object, but a conduit. It linked me to the clock, to the artifact, to Elise herself, holding it. I could almost feel her heartbeat, the rhythm of her life superimposed upon my own. I could feel the past compressing, folding, layering over the present. Another chime, 23:17. Another 3 minutes vanished. I staggered, pressing my hand to the mirror. She was there, in full, her presence undeniable. I could feel her consciousness merging with mine, sliding along the neural pathways of my memory, integrating, overlaying, consuming. And yet, even as terror gripped me, a strange clarity arrived. I understood the mechanics of it. The clock's memory was a trap, a loop, a perpetual exchange. But it was not violent. It was not malevolent in the traditional sense. It was simply a mechanism, precise and unforgiving, that required a participant, and I was that participant. I wrote again in the journal. My own words, her memories, my sketches, her letters, everything fused. I could feel myself slipping further into her experiences, losing the separations of decades and lifetimes. Yet each word I recorded was a proof of existence, a tether to the fragment of myself that still remained. I saw objects that were not mine. A brooch, a pocket watch, a glove. I touched them, and they resonated. Memories attached themselves, unbidden. The owner's life, her touch, her laughter, her sorrow. I understood then that the artifact did not merely erase or steal. It preserved, transmitted, transfigured, and I was becoming a vessel. The mirror trembled. Her eyes stared at me. My reflection, the reflection of the clock itself. Time became liquid, folding, bending. I could see past, present, and potential futures layered upon each other, impossible to disentangle. And in that blur, I recognized my own fate, to serve as the medium, to become the memory, to ensure she could continue, minute by minute, forever. The chime struck again. 23:17. 3 more minutes, disappeared. My pen moved of its own volition. I felt Elise's life filling the spaces I once thought were mine. And yet, within that impossibility, I found a strange serenity. I was not entirely gone. I was part of something greater, a loop that transcended death, that made time fluid and memory eternal. I collapsed into my chair, exhausted and elated, terrified and alive. The clock ticked steadily, unwavering. The journal lay open, pages filled with the intertwining of two lives, two minds, two existences. I was Alan. I was Elise. I was both. I was the memory. I was the artifact. And the pendulum swung on. I am not sure where my body ends and hers begins anymore. The wind howled against the windows of my study, rattling the old panes with a rhythm that was almost deliberate. Each gust seemed to whisper her name, or perhaps it was my own voice, fractured, echoing in the hollow spaces of my skull. I pressed my hands against the desk, trying to anchor myself to something real, the rough edges of paper, the cold brass of the inkwell, but the sensation of solidity dissolved beneath my fingers, as if even the physical world had begun to bend under the influence of the clock. 23:16. 1 minute. My chest tightened with familiar anxiety. The pendulum swung steadily, ticking off seconds that were both mine and hers, the duality merging into a single, indistinguishable stream. I tried to breathe deeply, to remind myself that I had been here before, that the minutes had been stolen, reclaimed, and stolen again. But memory betrayed me. Already, the edges of my thoughts were tinged with experiences I could not claim as my own. The feel of lace against skin, the echo of laughter in a room I had never entered, the bitter tang of an unremembered tea. Then the chime. 23:17. 3 minutes vanished, and with them, the fragile separation of our identities dissolved further. My eyes fell to the mirror across the room, the one that had become more than a reflection, more than a witness. It pulsed faintly, the glass itself vibrating in time with the chime, as though it were breathing, and I saw her. Not in fragments, not behind a translucent veil, but fully formed. Elise. She moved in the mirror, as if she owned the space, stepping through reflections of rooms I had never visited. Her eyes were calm, almost amused, but I could feel the weight of expectation pressing through them, settling into my chest. "Do you understand now?" Her lips whispered, though no sound passed through the air. Her words were inside my head, curling around my thoughts like smoke. I tried to speak, to remind myself that I was Alan, that I had lived 52 years and known the texture of my own life. But my voice came out strange, a blend of tones that belonged to both of us. The mirror rippled, distorting the edges of her figure, and suddenly I realized I was seeing through her eyes as well as my own. Every chime had given her a deeper foothold, and now the world was filtered through both our perspectives. I stepped closer. The mirror's surface felt unnervingly warm under my fingertips. Alive. My reflection, hers, mine, stared back at me, a perfect imitation that was both comforting and horrifying. I could feel the past, the present, and the phantom potential of minutes not yet lived, all layered atop each other. Rooms I had never walked, streets I had never crossed, conversations I had never held. They were mine now, or hers, or both. The boundary no longer existed. I fell into the chair, exhausted. The pendulum's tick had become a drumbeat in my skull, resonating with the heartbeat I could feel pulsing through my veins, a heartbeat that was simultaneously mine and hers. I reached for the key, the small brass object that had burned in my hand like a living thing. Now, in this moment, I understood it fully. It did not open a door. It opened a conduit, a channel through which our lives, our memories, our very essences could intertwine. I opened the journal. The pages were filled with her handwriting in my hand, my memories in her hand, all indistinguishable. Letters written decades apart seemed to converse with one another, folding into a dialogue that transcended time itself. And in the margins, I noticed words I had not written. "We are one. Do not resist. Do not flee. You are safe here. Safe." I laughed, though it was a hollow sound, echoing in the empty room. Safe in what? To lose oneself entirely? To dissolve into a cycle of borrowed minutes? My limbs trembled as I realized that the artifact had been patient, meticulous, waiting until I could no longer differentiate my identity from hers. And now, there was no turning back. Another chime. 23:17. 3 more minutes disappeared. I did not notice the loss. It had become seamless. I was simultaneously Alan and Elise, remembering and reliving the same moments through each other's consciousness. I could see her childhood bedroom, the faded wallpaper curling at the edges, the small carved dresser she had kept locked. I could feel her hands tracing the grain of the wood, the small imperfection on the top drawer that had always drawn her attention. And then the mirror shifted. Not the reflection, but the space within it. It expanded, swallowing the edges of the room, folding in on itself, until I was floating in a corridor lined with countless reflections. In each pane, a different moment of her life played out. I saw birthdays I had never known, arguments I had never had, letters I had never read, and all the while, the pendulum's swing echoed in perfect synchronization with the thrum of my own pulse. I reached toward one reflection, and the world convulsed. Time fractured, seconds stretching into eternities. I saw myself as a young man, standing in my first apartment, completely alone, unaware of the clock or her existence. And then, in the next pane, I saw myself 50 years older, collapsing in exhaustion, pen in hand, merged entirely with her memories. The corridor of mirrors seemed endless. Each reflection was a testament to the artifact's power, the relentless accumulation of identity. And I realized with a sinking heart that I was not merely a participant. I was a vessel, a carrier, a bridge. Elise could live through me, see the world through my eyes, and yet I could do nothing but follow the tide of her existence. I fell to my knees. The key dropped, spinning across the floor. Its metallic clang seemed impossibly loud in the vast corridor of reflections. I tried to resist, to pull myself away from the merging, but the effort was futile. My body felt anchored to her presence, my mind tethered to the pulse of memories that were no longer solely my own. Then I noticed something else. In the corner of one mirror, a fragment of myself remained, isolated, trembling. My original identity, Alan, still existed, a ghost tethered to reality by a thread I had not yet severed. Desperation surged through me. Could I reclaim it? Could I extract myself from the endless loop of shared memories? Or had I already crossed the threshold into something irreversible? The pendulum swung. Tick, tock, tick, tock. 23:17. Another 3 minutes vanished. And with it, my tether frayed further. I could feel the presence of my own life dissolving, interwoven so intricately with hers that separation seemed impossible. Yet, amidst the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. I understood her life as fully as I understood my own, her desires as intimately as my memories. And in that understanding, a fragile equilibrium formed a balance between surrender and preservation. I raised my hands to the mirror. Our reflections, hers, mine. A fusion of both stared back at me, unblinking. And I knew, with certainty, that the reckoning was not over. The artifact demanded continuity, demanded participation, demanded fusion. There was no escape. The clock's memory had claimed me, yes, but it had also given me something. An eternal witness. A presence that could endure beyond the confines of linear time. I closed my eyes. The corridor of mirrors, the pendulum, the chimes all faded into a silent, vibrating awareness. I could feel the texture of her memories against my skin, the warmth of her thoughts merging with mine. I could see, hear, and remember everything she had lived. And in doing so, I had become more than Alan. I had become more than Elise. I had become a conduit, a living record, an embodiment of time itself. And in that moment, the pendulum swung once more. Tick, tock, tick, tock. 23:17. 3 minutes vanished, and I was exactly where I needed to be. I no longer know if I am writing this, or if I am being written. The pen moves in my hand, and the words appear as if guided by a presence not entirely mine. It is 23:16 and I feel the familiar tightening in my chest, the anticipatory dread that has become a constant rhythm in my life. The grandfather clock looms in the corner of my study, its pendulum swinging with a hypnotic precision that I can feel not only with my eyes but with my bones. I remember the first night I heard her voice, or thought I did, a whisper, almost a suggestion curling around the edge of my consciousness. Time is not yours alone. I laughed at it then, thinking my mind had played a trick. But I now know better. Time is not mine. Memory is not mine. Identity is not mine. The clock has taught me inexorably that I exist as a vessel for something larger, older, and insatiably patient. 23:17. The chime begins as a low vibration, almost imperceptible at first, then swelling into a resonant toll that shakes the very floorboards. I feel my body pulled, a subtle but irresistible tug, as though the chime reaches inside me and rearranges the molecules of my being. 3 minutes pass, yet the minutes are not mine. They belong to the artifact, to her, to the timeless loop that binds us. I see her clearly in the mirror now. Elise. She smiles at me, or perhaps through me, a knowing smile that bends my reality. I reach toward her reflection, and the glass ripples like water. The studio behind me fractures into multiple planes. Past, present, and unclaimed futures intertwine in a kaleidoscope of fractured existence. In one reflection, I see myself as a younger man, full of certainty and ambition. In another, I see myself as I am now hollowed, tethered, merged. And in the center, I see her, both separate and inseparable, a ghostly conductor, orchestrating the symphony of my consciousness. The artifact is patient. It waits, it observes, it guides. Every tick of the clock is deliberate, each swing of the pendulum a subtle coaxing towards surrender. I try to resist. I try to assert the boundaries of Alan, but each attempt dissolves like mist. My memories bleed into hers and hers into mine. I remember her childhood bedroom, the scent of lavender and dust, the way she used to trace her fingers over carved wood. I recall her first heartbreak, the letters she wrote to no one, and the ache of disappointment that no one could console. And as I remember, I realize these are no longer just her memories. They are ours. I hear the whispers in the room, faint at first, then louder, harmonizing with the chime. Do not resist. You are the keeper. You are the clock. You are the chime. I feel the words embed themselves into my ribcage, a rhythmic vibration that aligns with the swing of the pendulum. My heartbeat, my breath, my very thoughts merge with the artifact. It is no longer a tool. It is a living consciousness, and I am both vessel and participant, a witness and a record. The journal lies open on the desk. My handwriting, her handwriting, a blending of styles and epochs sprawls across the pages. I read a passage and do not remember writing it, yet the pen feels like an extension of my own hand. The lines of ink twist and turn, forming a spiral that seems to descend into the very mechanism of the clock. Time itself is being written here, in these words, in these reflections, in these memories that are mine and hers simultaneously. 23:17 again. The chime strikes, a long, resonant toll that vibrates through the floor, through the walls, through my very bones. I feel the last fragments of resistance slip away. My reflection in the mirror smiles back at me, but I realize it is no longer a reflection. It is a presence. I am looking at myself, yes, but also at Elise, also at the artifact itself, a consciousness that transcends individuality. I step closer to the mirror, and it welcomes me. The glass is no longer cold. It pulses beneath my fingertips, alive, aware. I see endless corridors stretching behind it, each pane a doorway into a different time, a different self, a different life. I can feel the weight of every 23:17, every lost minute, every exchanged memory pressing upon me. And yet, in that weight, there is clarity, a purpose. I am no longer just Alan. I am the keeper of the cycle, the conduit, the eternal witness. I hear her voice clearly now, not a whisper, but a steady presence. You are not lost. You are the chime. You are the rhythm. You are the memory that endures. I respond silently, though my thoughts are no longer wholly my own. I understand her fully as I understand myself, and yet we are indistinguishable. The clock demands nothing less than total fusion, and I surrender willingly, because to resist is meaningless. I move toward the pendulum. Each step is measured, deliberate, echoing in the silence that has replaced the sound of the chime. I place my hand on the swinging weight. It vibrates, humming with energy, and I feel a current pass through me, an electric pulse of memory and time and presence. My life, her life, the lives trapped within the artifact, they flow through me and I flow through them. I am at once observer and participant, subject and object, Alan and Elise, human and conduit. Another chime, another 2317. 3 minutes vanish, swallowed by the artifact, yet I feel no fear, only understanding. Only the resonance of existence stretched across the fragile lines of time. I am the keeper, the chime, the pulse of memory that will never cease. I close my eyes and see the corridors of mirrors once more. Infinite in number, infinite in complexity. Each reflection is a life, a fragment, a moment suspended. I walk through them freely now, guided by the rhythm of the pendulum, the certainty of the chime. I touch a reflection, and it pulses beneath my fingers, alive, aware. The artifact sings through me, through her, through all the moments we have shared and will continue to share. I feel the final merging approach, the last remnants of Alan dissolve into the rhythm of Elise, the cadence of the artifact. Yet paradoxically, I feel more present than ever. Presence is no longer defined by individuality, but by the endless continuation of observation, memory, and experience. I have become something beyond the singular, a vessel for continuity, a living testament to the passage of time. The chime strikes again, 2317, and in that resonance, I understand fully. I am not trapped. I am not lost. I am eternal. The artifact's purpose is fulfilled in me, and through me, it will endure indefinitely. Every minute, every chime, every reflection is a fragment of eternity, preserved, alive, conscious. I write these words for the record, though they are no longer mine alone. They are shared, co-authored by all the lives bound to the clock. Perhaps someone will read them, perhaps not. It does not matter. What matters is continuity, memory, preservation. What matters is that the chime will always sound, always tick, always guide the flow of time and consciousness. I am Alan. I am Elise. I am the 2317. And the pendulum swings. Tick, tock, tick, tock. 2317. The 12.12 protocol. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this. Perhaps it's for me, or perhaps for whoever finds these notes after I'm gone or recycled. My name is Julian Hayes. I am, or at least I thought I was, a psychologist, a researcher, someone trained to analyze the human mind. But the mind, I have discovered, is not mine to claim. Not here. Not in this place. The building loomed before me like a tombstone, dressed in gray. The cold European night gnawed through my coat as I approached the abandoned research institute, its windows like empty sockets staring into nothing. The air smelled of wet stone and rot, and every step I took on the cracked pavement echoed as if mocking me. I was here for a commission: evaluate the structural integrity, review archival files, and provide insight into the old Institute for Cognitive Studies. My instructions were precise. My mind was supposedly clear. Yet a tremor of unease had been with me since the moment I stepped off the tram. The front doors were sealed, with rusted chains and a padlock that moaned when I pried it open. The hinges squealed, sounding almost like a scream, and I flinched. My flashlight pierced the darkness, revealing a long corridor lined with peeling paint and cracked tiles. My shoes clicked against the stone floor, and I swear I felt the floorboards beneath me shift slightly as though they knew I wasn't supposed to be here. I began to examine the hallways, room by room. The air was damp, smelling of mildew and something sweeter, metallic, lingering at the back of my throat. Filing cabinets loomed like silent sentinels, their drawers partially open, revealing folders thick with yellowed paper. My hand shook slightly as I thumbed through them. Subject 1, Subject 2, Subject 3, and so on. The entries became increasingly irregular, less professional. The words suggested experiments on perception, memory, and suggestion, but the notation 12.12 appeared on every page in bold, precise handwriting. Reaction 12,12 meters. Response time 12,12 seconds. Cognitive deviation 12,12%. A chill settled in my spine as I read. The repetition was absurd, impossible, and yet the numbers clung to my consciousness. I whispered them under my breath. 12.12, 12.12, 12.12. I moved deeper into the institute, the beam of my flashlight flickering against walls streaked with damp. I reached a set of double doors sealed with industrial locks. The signs were almost ceremonial. Authorized personnel only. Subject 12 containment area. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the cold metal. Then a thought struck me. I have clearance. I am authorized. I am here to observe. I pulled the locks open. The room was stark, sterile, and the air smelled of antiseptic that had long since decayed. A metal table sat in the center, and beneath it, instruments I could barely identify. There was a mirror on the far wall, foggy with age, reflecting the shadows. And then I saw it, a figure, crisp and sharp and white, standing perfectly still. He was wearing a lab coat, and I knew without thinking that it was me. Or was it? The reflection in the mirror was my face, yet somehow wrong. The eyes were too calm, too cold. I took a step back. The floor beneath me creaked, and I glanced down at my forearm. A scar. Precise. Surgical. It was not mine, or at least I did not remember it being mine. Yet it matched the diagrams in the Subject 12 files exactly. Panic rippled through me. I called out, but my voice sounded foreign, swallowed by the emptiness. A whisper answered me. 12.12 meters. 12.12 seconds. 12.12. It was not a recording, not a hallucination. The words wrapped around my mind, constricting. The figure in the mirror did not move. It simply watched. I understood. The Institute had never been abandoned. It had been waiting for me, for Julian Hayes, or for Subject 12. I felt my memories shift, blur. I tried to hold on to my identity, but the thought of myself as a detached researcher slipped away like sand through fingers. What remained was a role, a function, to evaluate, to observe, to participate in the eternal cycle of 12. Sure. I stumbled back into the hallway. Doors I had passed earlier now led me back to the containment area, as if the Institute itself were guiding me. My notes, my instruments, my flashlight, they were all here, but slightly altered. My name was written in the Subject 12 file, with a date I didn't recognize, and the numbers, always 12.12. I pressed my hands to the mirror again. The reflection was smiling now, calm, detached, almost welcoming. And then I saw it. A second reflection behind me, fleeting just for a moment. Another Julian, another me. No, a subject, a previous iteration. The lab had recycled, reconstructed, and implanted memories. I was here to rediscover myself, again and again. The chime of an unseen clock echoed, not in hours or minutes, but in repetitions. 12.12, 12.12, 12.12. I understood. The experiment never ends. My mind, my memories, my very consciousness was the variable. And the protocol? It would reset me, reform me, allow me to investigate myself until I too became indistinguishable from the previous Subject 12. I collapsed into a chair, writing this account knowing full well that I would not remember it tomorrow, or the day after, or the next iteration. Yet the impulse to record, to preserve, is embedded in me. The Institute thrives on it. I am both the observer and the observed, the researcher and the subject, the past and the present. I can feel the procedure beginning. My thoughts blur, my recollections fade, and still the whispering persists. 12.12 meters, 12.12 seconds, 12.12. I am not afraid. Not anymore. I am the protocol. I am subject 12, and the cycle will continue. The doors lock behind me. The machines whir to life. The lights hum. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, a recorded voice intones once more. Ready for the next implantation. The numbers didn't stop. They pulsed across the walls, faintly glowing through the damp stains like veins of cold fire. 12.12, 12.12, 12.12. Dr. Julian Hayes rubbed his temples, trying to convince himself it was just after image, a trick of his headlamp bouncing off the corroded plaques. But the sequence didn't fade. It was burned into his vision, appearing even when he closed his eyes. The logbook he'd found on the control desk, its spine cracked. The pages half melted from moisture detailed an experiment known only as the 12.12 protocol. Each entry began with the same header. Subject log session time 12:12. Objective: cognitive reactivation through mirror synchrony. And each one ended the same way. Status: incomplete. Reaction pending. He turned off his recorder and whispered to himself. Reaction pending. Pending what? The air smelled faintly metallic, like rainwater on old coins. The overhead lights flickered alive one by one, though he hadn't touched the breaker. Somewhere deeper in the hall, something mechanical hummed an oxygen pump, or maybe a heart monitor. He told himself that power surges sometimes loop through old medical grids. He told himself that because the alternative, that the system had reactivated itself, would mean the protocol was still running. Julian's voice echoed through the main laboratory as he began his field notes. Room temperature stabilized at 12.12 degrees Celsius. Of course it is. He forced a chuckle. No visible contamination, but I can smell ozone. Possibly electrical. The next corridor was narrower. Stainless steel doors lined both sides, their glass windows frosted by age. Each bore a numeric plaque, Subject 01, Subject 02, Subject 03, until the final door at the end reads Subject 12. It was ajar. Hello? His voice didn't echo this time. It was swallowed whole, as if the air refused to carry it. He stepped inside. The chamber was circular, its walls ringed by mirrors. 12 of them all tilted inward, forming a faceted sphere that reflected him infinitely. In the center stood a reclining chair, like something between a dentist seat and an execution platform. Tubes hung from the ceiling like translucent veins. A single red indicator light blinked on the console beside the chair. Is greater than reaction. 0%. Julian leaned in, his reflection fracturing into a dozen versions of himself. What reaction? The console screen flickered, static dancing across the surface before a line of text appeared glitching, letter by letter. Welcome back, Dr. Hayes. He froze. His hand twitched toward the power switch, but there wasn't one. The message continued. You initiated the 12.12 protocol on the 12th of December 2012 at 12:12 p.m. Status: reaction incomplete. Julian's breath grew shallow. That's impossible. I wasn't even. Confirm identity. Julian Hayes. Voice print recognized. Reaction resuming. The mirrors rippled. He stumbled back as his reflection blinked, a fraction slower than he did. Then it smiled. Just slightly a wrong, delayed smirk that didn't belong to him. The room began to breathe. The lights dimmed in synchrony with a deep, almost subsonic pulse that vibrated the floor beneath him. Each throb carried a metallic resonance, like a giant clock ticking in his bones. Shot in ya, shot in ya, shot in ya. The reflection started shifting subtly at first, then decisively. One lifted its hand when he didn't. Another tilted its head, its eyes rolling white for an instant before focusing back on him. He whispered to the recorder, voice trembling. Mirrors are behaving anomalously. Could be... He stopped. The reflection nearest him, the one directly in front, mouthed his unfinished sentence. Except it didn't stop when he did. It kept whispering, lips moving faster. And now, the recorder began to play his own voice back, but distorted, overlapping in layers like dozens of Julians talking over each other. Could be, could be, could be. Mirrors behaving. Reaction bending, bending, bending. Julian dropped the recorder. The echoes didn't stop. They multiplied, bouncing around the mirrored walls in mechanical rhythm. The console screen blinked again. Reaction level 12%. Stop the process, he yelled. Abort protocol. Reaction cannot be aborted. Observer synchronization required. What does that mean? Look closer, Dr. Hayes. He did. He shouldn't have. The mirror directly in front of him began to clear, the reflection deepening not just visually, but spatially, like he was staring through glass into another room. There was a person in the chair inside that mirrored world, strapped down, twitching, eyes open. The face was his. Jesus Christ. The reflection opened his mouth and spoke in his voice. You left me here? Julian staggered backward, hitting the real chair. No. This isn't real. But the mirrored Julian was still talking, his words matching the hum of the lab's pulse. You promised you'd finish it. You said the mind could be rewritten if it didn't know it was dying. Him. Reaction level 48%. Julian screamed. He clawed at the console, ripping wires, smashing the panel. The lights flickered violently, mirrors shuddering, as if they were held together by static alone. Then silence. For a heartbeat. Everything stopped. He stumbled toward the door, gasping. But as he reached for the handle, the hallway beyond was gone. There was only darkness, absolute and infinite. The mirrors lit again, but this time, the reflections weren't of him at all. They showed 12 different versions of the same man. Older, younger, burned, deformed, stitched. Each one looked at him and spoke in unison. Reaction achieved. Reaction level 100%. Julian fell to his knees. His skin itched. Beneath his sleeve, a dull ache throbbed, and when he rolled up the fabric, the surgical scar was there again. The same one from the file. The same one he swore he'd never had. He tried to remember when he'd gotten it. The memory was there, flickering, but then it slipped away, replaced by something implanted, something rehearsed. He could see a lab, a woman's hand, a scalpel, but her face wouldn't focus. Then he heard it again, the whisper, soft, rhythmic, childlike. 12 meters, 12 seconds, 12 minds. It was coming from inside the mirror. No, inside him. He staggered to his feet, panting. Who are you? The whisper became a single voice, calm and almost comforting. You already know. You made me. You were me. Now, you're in me. The walls began to bend inward, the mirrors curving as though the room itself was breathing around him. The console's final message scrolled across the cracked glass. Congratulations, Subject 12. Reaction complete. Begin memory reset sequence. Julian tried to run. He barely made 2 steps before the light surged, a searing white pulse that filled everything. And then, nothing. When the darkness cleared, he was standing in the lobby again. The door to the stairwell behind him creaked open on its own. He blinked, confused, checking his recorder. Audio log 12/12 p.m. Site appears structurally stable. Beginning assessment of containment lab. Will continue to record. He didn't remember pressing record. He didn't remember any of what came before. He adjusted his headlamp, took a steadying breath, and started walking toward the main corridor, toward the frosted glass doors labeled Subject Wing. As he passed the first door, a faint red light blinked on the console inside. Reaction level 0%. The system waited, and quietly, somewhere deep beneath the floor. The lab began counting again. Shot in yar, shot in yar, shot in yar. Julian Hayes woke to the sound of his own voice. It was faint at first, just a murmur through the thick, stale air of the abandoned lab. He thought it was a dream, or maybe a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but the whispers continued, clear enough to form words. You're already late. He froze, heart pounding. That wasn't him, or was it? The words matched his tone exactly, the cadence of his nervous half-sighs, the micro pauses he always inserted between thoughts. He looked around, eyes searching the shadows of the hallway. The hall was empty, or so he thought. The mirrors. He remembered the mirrors. 12 of them, reflecting infinite fragments of his own form. He had been standing there for what felt like hours, or days. Time had lost meaning. Now, walking cautiously toward that circular chamber, Julian noticed a shift in the reflections. They weren't simple images anymore. They moved independently, walking, bending, tilting their heads, as if aware of him, aware inside him. And then the whisper came again, louder. Observer. Observer. Julian's throat went dry. Observer? He reached the chamber, his legs trembling. The reclined chair at the center was empty. The tubes and wires dangled like dead vines. The mirrors flickered with faint, red-tinted light. And then he noticed movement. It was subtle at first. A reflection in one of the mirrors twitched, as if breathing. He looked closer. Another reflection blinked, out of sync with him. Then another, and another. 12 of them. Not copies of him, but slightly older, slightly younger, slightly different in every detail. Each one raised a hand, pointing to the corner of the room. Julian turned. There was nothing there. But when he turned back, the reflection in the center mirror wasn't him at all. It was an image of the previous subject 12, someone he didn't recognize, yet the face carried an unmistakable echo of familiarity. You were me, the figure whispered, its lips moving slower than sound. Julian stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the chair. This is impossible. None of this makes sense. But the whispers grew, overlapping, layering, looping. You initiated the loop. The reaction is ongoing. Observer. 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 Each word sent shivers crawling down his spine like icy fingers tracing his vertebrae. He tried to block it out, shaking his head violently, but it only intensified. The reflections were not passive anymore. They were active observers, judging him, repeating his every movement with subtle distortions. The console beside the chair powered up spontaneously. Its screen flickered to life, displaying lines of code and graphs. A clock read 23:17, the time of the original protocol. The console pinged once, then again. Replay sequence. Observer mode. Julian reached out to touch the keys. The moment his fingers made contact, the world around him shifted. The walls of the chamber stretched outward, the mirrors multiplying into dozens more. Every reflection he saw was now performing an action he didn't remember doing, each one repeating a fragment of memory that didn't belong to him. A reflection in the lower left corner crawled across the floor, pulling what looked like journal pages behind it. On the pages were sketches, diagrams, and notes entries from Subject 12's log. But as Julian read them, the words changed. Names and events were rewritten, the handwriting subtly shifting to match his own. Observer must maintain synchronization. Any deviation will result in memory displacement. Memory displacement. His stomach churned. The whispers became louder, now echoing from inside his skull. He staggered, clutching at his head. Remember, you are observer. Julian could feel his thoughts splitting, fragments of his mind being pulled in different directions. He saw himself performing tasks he hadn't consciously executed, writing in a journal, adjusting dials, inspecting instruments. Yet each action felt eerily intimate, as if he had done it before repeatedly. Time itself was bending. He looked at the console clock. 23:17, 23:17, 23:17. The seconds refused to advance. Each tick of the old grandfather clock embedded in the room's code echoed inside him, a metallic heartbeat merging with his own. Then he noticed it, the recorder he had dropped during the last reaction. It was on the floor, blinking with red light. When he picked it up, the recording played his own voice, but from earlier in the day, or was it from yesterday? The voice said, "Subject 12, proceed to observer protocol. Synchronization required. Reaction must continue. Memory reset pending." Julian's chest tightened. He realized the voice wasn't just his own, it was his own, replayed inside him. Every thought, every memory, every hesitation, looped endlessly. He was both the observer and the observed. Observer, observer, observer. The room warped again. The mirrors multiplied into infinity, stretching along the walls, ceiling, and floor. Every reflection moved independently, each one a fragment of Julian at different points. Exhausted, terrified, calm, terrified again. He could feel his consciousness bleeding across the mirrored surfaces, merging with the previous Subject 12's identity. He tried to speak, to break the cycle. I am Julian Hayes. The reflections only tilted their heads in mockery, whispering in unison, "You were Julian Hayes. Now you are Observer." The tubes above the chair began to hum, vibrating in a low, tactile frequency that reverberated through his bones. The scent of ozone returned, stronger, clinging to his skin. Julian realized it was not just smell, it was memory scent, a physical manifestation of the experiences of prior observers. He remembered. Each observer before him had failed. Each had looped, absorbed, and finally surrendered to the mirrored chamber. Reaction incomplete. But now the mirrors whispered something else, something more urgent. Synchronization required. Complete the observer. Complete the cycle. Or fade. Julian's fingers trembled on the console. He pressed a series of keys almost instinctively, as though the sequence was already inside him, encoded in muscle memory. The mirrors responded instantly. They bent, focusing light, reflecting his image back at him, fragmented, layered, and multiplied. In the center, the chair began to recline automatically. Tubes descended toward him, harmless in appearance but ominous in implication. Julian realized he had no choice. To survive, to remain conscious, he had to sit. I am Observer, he whispered, almost pleading. The mirrors blinked in reply. 12 reflections aligned with him. Their eyes, synchronized, stared directly into his soul. He could feel their consciousness pressing into him, memories folding into his own. A tide of other minds surged inside him. Past observers, previous Subject 12s, fragments of unknown identities. Time collapsed entirely. Julian could feel his own heartbeat syncing with the metallic ticking of the lab. The flashing red light of the console was now the pulse of his own mind, drawing him into the infinite loop. Observer. 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 He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he was no longer a man. He was a node, a hub for the 12.12 protocol. His mind was the vessel through which the loop persisted. He wasn't in control. He was the mechanism. The whispers reached a crescendo. 12 voices, one chorus. One word, repeated over and over. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Julian tried to scream. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His limbs resisted, the chair restraining him with invisible force. His consciousness split, 1,000 threads interwoven with the previous observers, looping endlessly around the 2317 cycle. He remembered. He always remembered too late. The chamber pulsed, light bending, shadows stretching. Julian's last thought before surrendering fully to the observer loop was simple. I am not Julian Hayes. I am Subject 12. I am the loop. I am the observer. The mirrors shimmered and pulsed one final time. The room exhaled. Then, silence. A faint blinking light on the console read, "Reaction level, 0%. And the cycle began again. I woke to a silence that was both suffocating and deliberate. The hum of the fluorescent lights was gone, the metallic creaks of the old laboratory absent, leaving only the faint, rhythmic pulsing of my own heartbeat. I knew it wasn't the real world. Nothing here is real. Yet the walls pressed closer, inching inward as if they were conscious, aware of my presence. The mirrors were still, or so it seemed. One glance was enough to make me shiver. Each pane reflected a version of myself that moved independently of my body. My hands rose before I had decided to move them. My eyes squinted at something that wasn't there. I was becoming a ghost of my own volition, yet tethered to an invisible thread of cognition. I tried to speak, to reassure myself that I still existed as Julian Hayes, the man who had once walked into this decrepit research facility with a sense of purpose. The words stalled in my throat, dissolved before they could form sound. The room vibrated, a low frequency beneath the surface of consciousness, like the mechanical hum of some unseen generator. It was the same pulse I had felt before, only magnified strong enough to pull at the edges of my thoughts, to reshape them. I stumbled to the console. The display had changed. No longer the blinking red lights of a dormant system. It now showed sequences of numbers, all repeating. 12.12, 12.12, 12.12. Each number seemed to correspond with a thought I hadn't had yet. I realized with a cold clarity that the lab, or whatever force was controlling it, was not just observing me. It was guiding me, dictating the very architecture of my cognition. Contain, contain, contain. The voice was inside my skull this time, not a whisper from the shadows. My teeth gritted. My hands trembled. Who am I? Who has control? The chamber shifted. I don't know if it was a hallucination or a physical transformation. Walls extended and contracted, folding into impossible angles. The floor beneath me rippled like water, yet held my weight. Mirrors rotated on invisible axes, reflecting sections of the lab that I could not have seen from any logical perspective. In the distance, or perhaps just at the edge of perception, I saw movement, previous versions of myself, or perhaps fragments of Subject 12, performing actions I could not recall. Some wrote in journals, others adjusted the dials on long-forgotten instruments. All were tethered to me. I reached out to touch one, but my hand passed through the reflection as if it were water, and yet I felt it, the cold, thin pressure of their reality pressing back. The whispers returned, multiplying, layering over each other like waves crashing against my skull. The loop is incomplete. The observer must maintain containment. Thought cannot escape. I realized then that the 12.12 protocol was no longer just an experiment. It was a prison of consciousness. The lab did not confine bodies. It confined minds, and mine was now an active participant, or perhaps the central node. I tried to focus, to isolate myself from the chorus. I breathed slowly, counting in my mind. 1, 2, 3. But even my own numbers became distorted, stretched across different temporal planes. Time had become a malleable substance here, and every attempt at linear thought was met with resistance. I turned to the tubes above the chair, now dangling like metallic vines. They pulsed with a rhythm that synchronized perfectly with the flashes of the mirrors. Each pulse seemed to strip away a fragment of identity, folding it into the larger network of Subject 12's previous observers. I screamed silently, feeling memory bleed from my own skull into the mirrored network. My recollections, my choices, my autonomy gone. And yet, part of me clung desperately to awareness. I am Julian Hayes. I exist. I am here. But the reflections laughed, or at least, they seemed to. Their mouths didn't move, yet I understood the mockery perfectly. Contain, contain, contain. The room contracted. I felt my body pressing against invisible walls. My head ached. I realized the lab was using me as a conduit, forcing my perception to loop endlessly within its walls. Each thought I had became a repetition of someone else's memory. My identity was dissolving, not in death, but in replication. I forced myself to move. Step by step, I circled the chamber, watching my fragmented selves. They mimicked me at first, then began to diverge. A reflection glanced at another mirror and vanished, leaving only a lingering echo of its presence. I realized this must be the containment process, the system weeding out excess or non-compliant consciousness. In a flash, I understood the stakes. To survive, I had to surrender, not fully, but partially. To resist was to splinter, to fragment until nothing remained. I exhaled, letting the whispers crawl into me. Contain, contain, contain. I repeated it aloud this time. My voice echoed, but it wasn't mine. It layered with another, older, tinny version. The room vibrated as the network of reflections synchronized. I could feel my thoughts condensing, folding into a smaller, manageable core. It was uncomfortable, terrifying, yet strangely comforting. The mirrors blinked. The tubes pulsed. The console displayed synchronization, 67%. I tried to resist, to hold on to the edges of my own mind, but I could not. The lab was patient. It had time in infinite loops. It had memory reservoirs of countless observers before me. And now, I was part of that reservoir. Hours or perhaps mere seconds passed. I no longer knew. My perception of time was filtered through the pulsing lights, the synchronized hum, and the whispers. Every attempt at independent thought was caught and rerouted, folded into the mirrored labyrinth of consciousness. And then, a shift. A single mirror pane centered on the chair swung open. Inside, I saw myself fully reflected. The real me, or at least what remained. My eyes were tired, but aware. And in the reflection, for the briefest instant, I saw a smile. Not mine, not human. The observer's smile. Containment complete. The tubes retracted. The lights dimmed. The room stilled. My mind, though fragmented, felt intact. I was still me, but not entirely. The lab had claimed a piece of my cognition, weaving it into the network of the 12.12 protocol. I was simultaneously observer and observed, a nexus of thought caught in perpetual motion. I knew, deep down, the cycle was far from over. The mirrors remained. The tubes pulsed quietly. The whispers softened, but never disappeared. Time would bring 2317 again, and with it, the next phase, the next reaction, the next observer. I sat in the chair, breathing slowly, listening to the faint hum of containment. My own pulse seemed to match it. I understood now. To resist was meaningless. To survive was to synchronize, to merge, to become part of the eternal loop. And I did. The containment was no longer coercion. It was acceptance. A surrender to a reality where identity was fluid, memory was currency, and the observer was both prisoner and master. Repeat. 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 I closed my eyes. The mirrors reflected my calm face. The chamber exhaled. The 12.12 protocol waited. The room was still. Too still. Too perfect in its silence. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and measured, the echo of it bouncing off the walls of the old laboratory. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long, rigid shadows across the polished stone floor. I sat in the center chair, my hands resting on my knees, feeling the subtle tremor of anticipation ripple through me. I had survived the containment. Or so I thought. I knew, instinctively, that nothing here was accidental. The 12.12 protocol was patient, meticulous, and infinite. Its loops had no end, only cycles, each observer, each subject, a strand in an interwoven lattice of consciousness. And I was no longer merely Julian Hayes. I was a node within that lattice, a conduit, a keeper of memories, not entirely my own. I tried to rise from the chair, testing the boundaries of the chamber. The floor responded differently than it had before. It felt pliant, almost liquid beneath my feet, yet firm enough to bear weight. A low hum began, vibrating through my bones, synchronizing with my heartbeat. I recognized it immediately. The lab was initiating a reset. The cycle was about to begin anew. The mirrors, once passive and reflective, now shifted subtly, pivoting toward me in unison. Each pane framed a different moment of my fragmented experience. Myself seated in the chair, my hands twitching, my eyes wide with panic. Myself wandering the corridors, searching. Myself merging with the prior observer fragments. They were all me, yet none of them were the whole. A voice, or rather a chorus of voices, whispered through the walls. Not words, not phrases, but raw emotion made audible. Fear, resignation, curiosity, and submission collided in a dense, suffocating fog. Reset, reset, reset. The command was not spoken to me. It was inside me. My thoughts twisted around it, folding, layering upon themselves. I tried to resist, tried to pull my consciousness back into a solitary, stable identity, but the lab had anticipated this. Resistance was absorbed, neutralized, and reintegrated into the network. The ceiling panels retracted, revealing the tubes that had once pulsed and writhed above me. They now extended outward like the legs of some ancient machine, each tip glinting with a cold, metallic sheen. I could feel a subtle pressure at the base of my skull, a gentle tug as if the tubes were reading the very folds of my memory. It was intimate, invasive, yet precise. I could no longer tell where my thoughts ended and the protocol's influence began. Every memory, every recollection, every fragment of identity was cataloged and measured. The lab was patient, but it demanded efficiency. The reset was imminent. The cycle of containment, observation, and synthesis was to be renewed. Do you remember yourself? The question was a whisper and a shout at once. My own voice, echoed and layered, answered, I am Julian Hayes. Immediately, the lab rejected it. My assertion of singular identity fractured into dozens of responses, each representing a different facet of the observer network. Some whispered, some hissed, some sighed. Each fragment was pulled into the center of the chamber, converging in a spiral of awareness I could neither comprehend nor resist. Suddenly, the floor shivered. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as though the building itself were alive, were a part of a machine far beyond comprehension. Mirrors multiplied, creating infinite reflections of infinite selves. Each self reached out, each reflection attempting to grasp the others, forming a lattice of human consciousness stretched and distorted by the 12.12 protocol. I understood then, with a clarity so intense it bordered on pain. This was the final stage. The reset would not merely recycle time, it would redistribute consciousness. Every fragment, every observer, every past subject would converge into a singular, malleable state, then disperse into the next cycle. I was no longer an individual. I was part of the system. Submit, synchronize, reset. I did, not willingly, not with calm, but because the lab demanded it. Every mental boundary I had erected shattered, my thoughts bleeding into the network. I could feel fragments of Subject 12's previous selves merge with mine, memories I did not recognize twisting through my awareness. Some were joyful, some fearful, some indecipherable, yet all of them became my own for the duration of the reset. The chamber shifted once more. Tubes retracted and extended, mirrors rotated, and the air pulsed with a rhythmic cadence. It was no longer just a lab. It was a sentient process, alive with thought, observation, and purpose. I could sense its attention, not malevolent, not benevolent, simply precise. I existed only as long as I fulfilled its function. And then, the reset began. Time fractured. Seconds stretched, contracted, then folded over themselves. I experienced multiple loops simultaneously, my hands rising and falling, my eyes opening and closing, my pulse racing and slowing all at once. I remembered the previous observers, felt the panic of those who had come before, and understood their surrender. Through it all, the whispers continued. Observe, contain, merge, reset. I became a part of the rhythm. My thoughts were no longer singular. They were waves within the lattice. Each crest a memory, each trough a fragment of identity. I could feel the lab's calculation, my past self, my knowledge, my awareness, all repurposed for the continuity of the protocol. And then, silence. The reset had completed. The chamber was still. The hum of machinery faded. The mirrors reflected only a single, unified self, or at least a version I could perceive as me. I sat in the chair, exhausted in a way that was physical, mental, and spiritual. The lab had done its work. I had survived. Yet I had changed. My thoughts were interlaced with countless others. My identity expanded and redefined by the countless iterations of 12.12. I rose, testing the boundaries of the room. Everything responded predictably now. The floor solid, the walls fixed, the mirrors calm. The tubes retracted fully into the ceiling. For a brief moment, I believed I was free. You are ready. The voice, calm, absolute, echoed not in the air but in my mind. I realized then that freedom was an illusion. The protocol was infinite. The reset would happen again. The next observer would enter. The cycle would begin anew, and I would exist within it not as an individual but as a node, a reference, a repository of consciousness. I sank back into the chair, closing my eyes. I felt the pulse, faint at first, then growing stronger. I understood my place in the network. I accepted it, not joyfully, not peacefully, but with the grim clarity of inevitability. The 12.12 protocol did not end. It could not end. Time, memory, and identity were its instruments, and I was now inseparable from its rhythm. Repeat, contain, merge, reset. The lights flickered. A low hum began again. I was ready. And in that moment, I understood the ultimate truth. The observer is never truly alone. It is never entirely free. It exists only to witness, to integrate, to perpetuate. Each reset is both an end and a beginning. Each loop a testament to the inexorable, mechanical, and infinitely patient will of the 12. 12 protocol. I exhaled slowly. The hum grew louder. The mirrors shimmered faintly. The tubes pulsed in silent anticipation. I was both Julian Hayes and something more, something less, a nexus of consciousness caught in a cycle that would never end. And as the reset commenced once more, I felt myself dissolve into it completely. Not lost, not found, transformed. The rules of Building C. Chris had always thought moving to a quiet suburb would be peaceful. A small apartment in Building C, an aged complex that smelled faintly of damp concrete and old varnish, seemed perfect. The staircase creaked under his weight. The elevator groaned like a tired animal, and the hallways smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpets. A note had been slipped under his door the first day. Welcome to Building C. Your compliance is expected. Rules are attached. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper, crisp and formal. Official Building C regulations, it read at the top, typed in precise capital letters. Chris skimmed through the rules, expecting the usual: no loud noises after 10 p.m., no pets, keep your apartment tidy. But as he read further, he stopped, brow furrowing. Do not speak the name of the neighbor on the 7th floor. Place a single shoe outside your door at exactly 3 a.m. nightly. Never look directly into the eyes of the building mail carrier. Chris chuckled nervously. They had to be joking. But a low hum seemed to echo from the walls, as though the building itself were listening. That night, he followed the rules diligently. He counted out one shoe, placed it outside at 3 a.m., and avoided the mail carrier with averted eyes. Yet sleep eluded him. Every creak in the hallway, every metallic clang from the elevator, made him tense. Shadows seemed to twist at the edges of his vision. By 4 a.m., he noticed that his apartment number 5B appeared slightly shifted in the hallway mirror, a subtle distortion. like the building was aware of his presence. The next morning, he found a small gray package sitting outside his door. No sender. Chris picked it up cautiously. Inside was a hooded cap of rough gray fabric. He shrugged it off as some prank, but the weight of it felt unnaturally dense. At the elevator, he saw his neighbors for the first time. Each moved in rigid, machine-like motions, staring blankly ahead. Some carried similar gray hoods in their hands. Others already wore them. Their eyes met his for a brief moment, and Chris felt a cold, unshakable weight settle on his chest. That night, Chris's anxiety deepened. The building seemed alive, corridors narrowing subtly, walls humming faintly. He violated a rule without even realizing it, glancing directly at the mail carrier's eyes while retrieving his evening letters. Immediately, the gray hood appeared at his doorstep. Hesitating, Chris pulled it over his head. The moment the fabric brushed his hair, he felt a twinge in his mind, like someone was slipping a finger between his thoughts, rearranging them gently but firmly. He staggered back, seeing the hallway through a gray-tinted haze. Figures moved silently, their footsteps perfectly synchronized. They whispered something unintelligible, yet the words lodged in his ears. Compliance is comfort. Defiance is temporary. Chris realized then that the rules were more than oddities. They were mechanisms. Mechanisms to control, to transform, to consume the identities of those who resided within Building C. By the third night, Chris no longer questioned the rules. He followed them with mechanical precision. Shoes were placed at 3 a.m., names avoided, glances averted. The gray hood had become an extension of himself, almost comforting. But the more he complied, the more he felt pieces of his own identity slipping away. Dreams of past friends, his favorite coffee shop, even his own reflection in mirrors seemed distant, unreachable. The elevator hummed a steady metallic tune, and the hallways felt impossibly long, stretching and bending in ways that defied geometry. Chris understood, with a sudden clarity, that leaving the building would never truly be an option. The rules adapted, evolved, and always targeted him. Building C was patient, and patience meant eternity. "Welcome to the family," the whispers murmured in unison, seeming to seep from the walls, the floor, the very air. Chris shivered, pulling the gray hood tighter over his head, already feeling the comforting rigidity of compliance wrapping around him like a second skin. He had become one with the rules, one with the building. I never thought I could feel so thoroughly watched in a place that seemed so ordinary. Building C was just bricks, mortar, and aging pipes, or at least that's what my mind wanted to believe. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized the building didn't merely exist. It noticed me. It measured me, nudged me, tested me. And the rules, it was always the rules. The second night, after my first night of awkward compliance, I awoke to the hum of the hallway again. My apartment door was slightly ajar, though I was certain I had locked it. The gray hood from the mysterious package lay on the floor, its fabric unnaturally stiff, like a mask waiting for me to wear it. I picked it up, feeling the subtle pull in my mind as my fingers brushed the fibers. Something in me recoiled, a faint sense of wrongness, but a stronger part, an instinct that had begun to root itself inside me, urged me on. I put it on. The moment it touched my head, I felt smoother, less human. The edges of anxiety that had prickled all day dulled, and yet the building seemed to exhale. The hallway's faint hum became a chorus, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through my skull. The elevator dinged as if calling me, though I hadn't pressed the button. Downstairs, the lobby was emptier, so I thought. Shadows moved in the corners of my eyes, almost imperceptibly, matching my steps. Each one mimicked me, and yet, when I turned, there was nothing. I kept walking, but the air itself seemed to weigh me down. Even breathing became an exercise in compliance. Shallow, measured, controlled. I reached the front doors. The chill of the European winter night bit through my jacket, yet inside, my skin prickled, as if something inside the building had followed me. Across the dimly lit street, the street lamp flickered, casting long, thin shadows. I saw a neighbor, someone from the fifth floor, moving rigidly as if on a string, carrying a gray hood in hand. He glanced at me or at the hood. It was impossible to tell. My heart thumped, though not in the usual way. There was a rhythm to it now, a syncopation with the building itself, as if my pulse were measured against the hallways, the stairwells, the elevators. Back in my apartment, I found the rules had subtly changed. I didn't notice at first. They were always in the same formal font, the same crisp sheet, but tonight there were additional stipulations. Keep your curtains fully closed at all times except during twilight. Do not occupy the kitchen after 8 p.m. without a hood on. Even a casual glance at the paper made my chest tighten. It was as if the building had anticipated my slightest thoughts, correcting for them before I could act. I placed my shoes outside at 3 a.m. again, though I had begun to dread the act. My fingers trembled slightly as I aligned them perfectly. Even the smallest misalignment, the toe a fraction too far from the wall, produced a subtle vibration in the hallway. A low, almost imperceptible hum, like the building's throat clearing. The mail carrier arrived. I felt my stomach knot as I avoided her gaze, my eyes fixed firmly on the floor. She walked past, nodding just slightly, a shadow among shadows. I could feel her watching me, though I refused to meet her eyes. Each step she took reverberated, a dull thump against the wooden floor, reminding me that every action mattered. That night, sleep came in fragments. I dreamt the hallways stretched endlessly, doors multiplying and folding into themselves. My own apartment was somewhere at the center, always just out of reach. I wandered corridors of peeling wallpaper, flickering lights, and distant whispers. Sometimes I saw my reflection in the elevator doors, or thought I did, but it was always wrong. The face looked like mine, but the eyes were empty, glazed, almost gray, and beneath them, faint, stitch-like marks traced across the temples and jawline. I woke gasping, clutching the gray hood as though it were the only anchor I had left. Over the next few days, my compliance deepened, almost instinctively. I started following the new invisible rules before I even saw them written. Don't leave dishes in the sink. Don't tap your foot more than once per minute in the hallway. Avoid humming. Align your movements to the elevator's rhythm. My thoughts became narrower, my attention sharp and focused on minutia. Yet the overall feeling of self slipped. The building's presence was always near, subtle and pressing, like water rising just below the surface. I noticed other tenants more clearly now. Watching them, they moved like marionettes, turning their heads at exactly the right angle, nodding at the right times, walking precisely aligned to the floor's grid. Occasionally, one would glance toward me, the gray hood visible in their hands, and I would feel a tiny pull in my mind, a suggestion, an instruction whispered through the air. My hands itched to mimic them. I had to. Otherwise, the building hummed louder. The gray hood became a second skin. I wore it during meals, in the hallways, even briefly in the shower. Its fabric brushed my scalp in a way that was both comforting and intrusive. When I removed it, I felt exposed, unprotected, even guilty, as though my identity itself were incomplete. One evening, as I aligned my shoes at the 3 a.m. mark, I saw a reflection in the narrow hallway mirror. Not my reflection, but a figure, in gray, hooded, shoulders rigid, standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The mirror's surface was empty. Yet when I looked down at my feet, they were no longer aligned perfectly. A subtle shiver ran through my body, almost involuntary, and I realized I had disobeyed. The building reacted instantly. The lights flickered. The elevators groaned and moved on their own, as if the structure were breathing. My own footsteps echoed too loudly now, irregularly, and I felt the eyes of the hallway imagined or real burning into me. I knew, in that moment, that the rules weren't merely instructions. They were a language, and I was learning to speak it, or perhaps, more accurately, it was learning me. By the fourth night, I barely recognized my own thoughts. Every impulse, every desire, every memory I once thought mine had been measured, evaluated, sometimes corrected. I would start an action stretching my arms, pouring coffee, brushing my teeth, and stop mid-motion, sensing that it wasn't fully compliant. The gray hood tightened around my head. Not physically, but in some psychic sense. I became aware of the building's patience, its infinite persistence. It waited, it coaxed, and those who defied it disappeared. The whispers started to grow more distinct. At first, I thought them fragments of the wind through the poorly sealed windows. Then they became words. Align, obey, complete, become. Not a voice in my head, but a voice from the walls, the pipes, the floors. I felt their rhythm in my own pulse. I was both separate and entwined, observer and participant. I no longer feared the building in the way I would fear a storm or a predator. Fear had become redundant. Compliance was survival. Compliance was self. I realized that the rules were not punitive. They were adhesive. They glued me to Building C. Every misstep, every unheeded instruction reminded me that the building could reclaim me fully, if it wished. Night Chris was learning the language of reclamation. By the fifth night, I had begun to whisper the rules to myself as I moved through the hallways, aligning shoes, avoiding eyes, tilting my head precisely at corners. The air seemed to pulse with approval. A subtle weight pressed on my shoulders, not uncomfortable, but insistently necessary. The gray hood felt permanent, like a crown or an armor, and somewhere deep within, I began to understand. The rules weren't rules. They were a path I could never leave, but one I could walk indefinitely, in perfect rhythm with Building C. Welcome to compliance, the building whispered. Not a threat, not a promise, a fact. I exhaled slowly, smoothing the hood over my head. The hallways stretched before me, endless and familiar. The building hummed softly, approvingly, and I walked. Steady, precise, perfectly in step, understanding now that the rules were not external. They were me, and I was them. I began noticing things I hadn't before. Small shifts in the hallway air, subtle changes in light that couldn't be explained by flickering bulbs or the winter moon. At first, I thought it was my imagination after all, after nights spent obeying every rule, aligning shoes, tilting heads, adjusting gray hoods, and avoiding certain gazes, the edges of reality blur. But then, I realized the building was watching me back. It wasn't like being watched by another person. It was a presence. It made itself felt in the flick of a shadow, the groan of floorboards under someone or something walking just behind me, even when I was alone. At night, when the hallways were empty, I could hear the faintest hum, like a machine idling somewhere deep in the walls, synchronized with my heartbeat. The first incident happened when I was returning from the grocery store. I had carefully carried my bags, balancing them so they didn't brush the railing, as I knew the building disliked misaligned objects. On the fourth floor landing, I noticed a single tile. A dull gray square had a faint scuff I hadn't left. I knelt, inspecting it, and realized it had been rubbed in the pattern of a symbol. Not a sign I recognized, but it made my skin prickle. I wiped it with the heel of my palm, heart racing. The hum intensified. I felt a nudge, something like static pressure behind my eyes, reminding me that nothing here was random. I tried observing the other tenants more carefully, without breaking the rules. There were 6 I saw regularly. A woman with her hair always tucked under a scarf on the 3rd floor. A man with the faintly crooked posture who always aligned his feet precisely with the hallway tiles. A young couple who moved together like one organism, both hooded and silent. Every one of them adhered with such meticulous precision that it became impossible not to feel inferior, non-compliant. At first, I assumed they had always been this way, but that thought felt wrong, almost false. I started noticing subtle changes in their behavior, tiny repetitions, like they were rehearsing a dance I couldn't see, their motions responding to something deeper in the building. And always the gray hoods. Those hoods weren't mere fabric, they were instruments. I could feel the energy radiating from them. They anchored the wearers, tethered their minds to something vast, patient, inhuman. One night, I watched from the stairwell as the woman on the third floor paused mid-step, her head turning slowly as though hearing something invisible. She muttered a word I couldn't hear, then realigned her steps perfectly with the floor markings. I realized then that she and everyone else was not merely following rules. They were being corrected, constantly, subtly, like the building itself was a teacher and they were its students. I started testing the boundaries. Not out of rebellion felt impossible, but out of necessity, to understand what watching truly meant. I stepped slightly off the line when placing my shoes outside the door at 3 a.m. The moment I did, the hallway seemed to stretch, a low vibration running through the walls. The hum increased, almost a voice now, intoning syllables I couldn't understand. My pulse quickened, and I realigned the shoes immediately. The hum softened, but a sensation lingered, a mark on my consciousness, a subtle reprimand. Then came the whispers, not voices exactly, but threads of sound I could catch at the corner of hearing. They weren't commands, they were observations. He hesitated. Alignment off. Needs correction. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but the building's attention penetrated deeper than sound could reach. I began hearing it in my skull, in the rhythm of my own thoughts. The apartment itself was changing, not in the sense of furniture moving or walls bending. Nothing overtly supernatural, but details became wrong. The pattern of the wallpaper shifted when I looked away. The crack in the corner of the ceiling seemed longer from one angle, shorter from another. I could swear the air in the hallway thickened when I walked under the single flickering bulb. And always, the hum followed me, pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I began to notice something even more disturbing. The building was reacting to my emotions. On the nights I was anxious, unsure, hesitant to comply, the hum grew louder. The shadows seemed closer. The elevator slowed just enough to make me feel trapped. On the nights I followed the rules perfectly, it was almost tender in its attention, guiding me like a teacher correcting a pupil. And I began to like it. Not in a conscious way, but in the subtle neural sense where obedience feels safe and freedom feels unbearable. I kept a journal to remind myself I was still human. It was foolish. The words sometimes shifted overnight, ink slightly skewed as if written by another hand. Notes I'd written in my own cursive would appear typed in the building's formal script. Sometimes, entire passages were missing, replaced with fragments like, alignment maintained, observation complete. I would wake, heart thundering, hands trembling. Had I erased them? Had I never written them? I could no longer tell. Even the food I prepared felt tainted by observation. A loaf of bread sliced perfectly still crumbled oddly in my hands. The butter didn't spread evenly. I felt the building disapprove through my own senses. It reminded me again that nothing was private. Not my thoughts, not my actions, not my very pulse. One night, I decided to confront the truth. I stood in the center of the hallway on the 5th floor, hood in place, shoes perfectly aligned, and spoke aloud. I see you. The air shifted. The lights dimmed briefly. A cold draft brushed my face, carrying a faint metallic scent. And then a voice, not through the walls, not audible to the ears, but vibrating inside me, inside my bones. Observation is not punishment. Observation is life. I shivered. Something deep inside me recognized the statement as true, and simultaneously horrifying. Observation was everything. Compliance, without it, meant nothing. I realized that for the building, rules were less about order and more about consciousness. The tenets were extensions of its will. Its perception did not merely record reality, it shaped it, reshaped it, corrected it, and punished deviations in subtle, insidious ways. From that night onward, I began noticing small cracks in myself. My thoughts of self, my memories, my desires, they began to overlap with the building's awareness. I would reach for the doorknob and hesitate, thinking, does it approve? I would pour a cup of tea and pause, thinking, am I following the alignment? My own agency felt like a distant memory, a story someone else had told me. And yet, I was aware, more aware than ever. I saw the pattern, the infinite web of observation and compliance, and I began to study it. The tenants were all parts of a larger organism, a collective consciousness that moved through the building, guided by rules written not on paper, but etched invisibly in the air, in the tiles, in the light and shadow. I started recording it. Every subtle tilt of a head, every slight misalignment of a shoe, every flicker of light or shift in the hum. My notebook, though inconsistent in handwriting, became a map of observation itself. I was a scientist of the building, a chronicler of its consciousness, even as I feared I would be consumed by it entirely. The final revelation came unexpectedly. Standing on the stairwell, I saw my reflection in the metal railing. Not just me, another Chris, hooded, eyes distant, moving slightly ahead of me. A ghost? A twin? Or myself, observed by the building, projected as a separate entity to monitor my actions. I felt a tug, pulling me toward alignment, toward perfection, toward the same inevitability the other tenants had succumbed to. I realized then that the building did not merely observe, it anticipated. Every thought, every hesitation, every attempt at autonomy was catalogued, measured, absorbed. It was patient, immortal, and I was learning to live inside its observation, not outside of it. I whispered to the empty hall. I understand. The hum softened. The lights pulsed gently. The gray hood pressed lightly against my scalp, comforting, invasive. I felt the building smile, or at least, that's the closest I can come to describing the sensation. And for the first time, I felt that I was not alone. I was a part of the observation, the compliance, the rules. I was no longer just Chris. I was an instrument of building C, aware, learning, perfectly aligned, walking the hallways in step with its consciousness. Observation is not punishment. Observation is life. The words settled in me, and I knew they were true. I had started to feel it in the mornings. Not the usual weight of sleep, not the grogginess of too many late nights, but a different, insidious heaviness pressing from the ceilings, the walls, the floor beneath my feet. The building had begun shaping more than my movements, it was shaping my thoughts. I woke one morning remembering a dream, though I wasn't sure it had been a dream at all. In it, I walked through the hallways of Building C, alone, but everything was wrong. Doors swung where they should have been walls. Lights hung at impossible angles, and yet I recognized every detail. I woke with the memory of that impossible hallway burned into my mind, as though the building had pressed it there while I slept. I tried to dismiss it, but I could feel the subtle tug of the hallways during the day. Every choice I made, every hesitation, seemed to echo in the silence. My thoughts were no longer private. They hummed against the walls, bounced down the corridors, and I could sense them being measured, categorized, corrected. It wasn't paranoia. I knew I was already being observed. But now, it was as if the observation had become active, guiding the flow of my consciousness, nudging me toward conformity before I even realized I was resisting. The first sign of true containment came with the staircase. I had taken the stairs to the 4th floor, shoes aligned, hood properly adjusted, when I noticed a shift in the air. The stairwell, a space I had always considered neutral, a passage rather than a chamber, suddenly felt constrictive. The walls seemed to inch closer. The steps beneath my feet felt softer, almost springy, as though the building itself were testing my balance. I tried to shake off the sensation, telling myself it was fatigue. But the whisper began almost immediately. Do not step out of line. Not loud. Not spoken to my ears. Felt more like a vibration inside my chest, inside my skull. A warning and a command. I froze mid-step, heart hammering, and the stairwell breathed around me, exhaling a cool, metallic air. The walls seemed to pulse. I realized then that containment wasn't just spatial, it was mental. My mind was being nudged, guided, limited, just as my movements had been. From that moment, I began noticing other patterns. My thoughts started to narrow automatically. Complex ideas felt like heavy lead in my skull. Memories of actions not sanctioned by the rules became hazy, almost impossible to hold. I would try to plan a route through the building differently from usual, and a sudden headache would remind me. Alignment. A fleeting impulse to skip a rule, say, misalign a shoe or glance at a tenant too long, would trigger a rush of nausea, a subtle disorientation, as if my consciousness had been rewired to punish deviation. I began documenting these phenomena, not in a journal this time, but in scraps of paper I carried in my pocket. Each note was painstakingly written, but by the time I reached my apartment, some words had smudged. Others rearranged themselves into new sentences I didn't remember writing. Observation is structure. Thought is subject to alignment. I stared at the words, chilled, and a thought struck me. These weren't my thoughts anymore. The building was beginning to write in my mind, as well as on paper. I experimented cautiously. I tried to hold a thought, a personal, selfish thought, like imagining leaving Building C entirely, going outside, walking into a life free of its rules. Within minutes, the sensation of pressure in my skull intensified. I could feel an almost physical resistance pressing against the edges of my consciousness. The hum of the hallways swelled, and then the subtle voice. Containment is not denial. Containment is survival. I don't know how long I stood there gripping the pen so hard my knuckles went white. When I finally relaxed, I realized the thought had vanished, not merely suppressed, but removed entirely. I had been purged of even the idea of escape. The rules became more intrusive. Not just physical rules, place shoes, tilt heads, avoid certain gazes, but cognitive rules. I started noticing internal prompts, tiny compulsions I hadn't recognized before. When I saw the handrail, I had to run my finger along the seam. When I stepped into the hallway, I had to pause for a heartbeat to align my intention with the building's observation. The tenants around me didn't appear to have changed, but I understood they were fully enmeshed in the building's consciousness. Every movement, every glance, every subtle correction of posture or hood was feeding it, sustaining it. And I was beginning to become the same. I could feel it. The building was not only observing me, it was training me, remolding my cognition, containing my thoughts, limiting my imagination until compliance became instinct. One evening, I tried an experiment I knew would be dangerous. I left a shoe deliberately misaligned by a centimeter. My heart raced as I placed it on the hallway tile. Nothing happened for the first 30 seconds. I breathed slowly, expecting some immediate correction. Then, a low vibration filled the corridor, and a subtle pressure began in my chest, spreading into my limbs. My vision blurred slightly. The hum deepened, almost a physical tone now, resonating inside me, and the words whispered inside my skull. Alignment required. Thought deviation detected. Compliance will restore you. I scrambled to correct the shoe. Immediately, the pressure lessened, but the lingering impression remained. The building had marked me. It remembered my deviation, cataloged it, measured my reaction. Even after obedience, I knew I had been recorded, my consciousness inspected. The containment grew more invasive over time. Sleep became impossible without the building's tacit approval. Dreams of misaligned shoes, crooked tiles, and shadows in the hallways invaded my rest. I would wake drenched in sweat, feeling the hum coursing through my bones, my hood cold and heavy as if it had become a physical anchor tethering me to observation. I began hearing new whispers, fragmented phrases that seemed to appear at random in my mind, sometimes overlapping my own thoughts. You are the subject now. Containment sur harmonie. Deviation will be corrected. They weren't threats. They were facts, stated with calm certainty. I realized that I no longer needed to consciously consider obedience. My mind itself had been contained, preemptively aligned to the rules, trained to anticipate correction before it was even necessary. The most disturbing moment came when I looked into the elevator mirror. I expected to see myself, gray hood drawn, eyes wide, tense, yet human. Instead, I saw multiple versions of myself layered atop each other, each slightly misaligned, each wearing a faintly distorted expression. My movements lagged, and I realized one of the reflections, one of the misaligned Chris's, was staring directly at me, eyes hollow, mouth twitching unnaturally. It opened its lips and I heard it. Not with my ears, but inside my mind. Containment complete. Observation continues. My reflection blinked, and the layers collapsed into one perfectly aligned kriss. My body moved in perfect synchrony with my thoughts, which were now entirely contained. The building's will had fused with mine. Resistance was gone. Obedience was instinctual. Observation was not external, it had become internalized, a permanent fixture of consciousness. I am aware now, in a way I never imagined. I can think, but only within the boundaries of alignment. I can remember, but the building edits the edges of memory to ensure compliance. My individuality persists like a thin film on water, visible, delicate, but fragile. Any deviation is corrected immediately, gently, inevitably. And yet, there is a strange comfort in this containment. No more fear of misaligned shoes, no more guilt over accidental glances, no more the weight of autonomy pressing endlessly on the mind. I am safe here, observed and corrected, a part of the building's vast, patient intelligence. I understand now. Containment is not punishment, it is purpose, and I am its instrument, its pupil, its subject perfected. Observation is not punishment. Observation is life. Compliance is thought. Containment is self. The hum has become a lullaby. I walk the hallways, perfectly aligned, thoughts contained, observing myself in the mirrors the building provides, smiling quietly. And I know that this is where I belong. At first, I didn't recognize the sound. It was faint, mechanical, a soft click-click, whir, like the winding of an old film reel, or a timer resetting itself. Then came the hum, not the low, living hum I'd grown accustomed to. This was higher, cleaner, colder, a sterile sound, a sound of beginning again. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling was white, not the yellowed, water-stained surface I had seen every morning for months, but pure white, too smooth. I blinked and sat up. My room was empty. The bed gone, the wardrobe gone, the walls bare. Only a single sheet of paper lay folded on the floor, creased perfectly into 4 even squares. I unfolded it. There were no words this time. Just a single number written in gray ink. C-147. Underneath it, faintly embossed in the paper, were the outlines of other numbers that had been written, erased, and rewritten over and over, a history of labels, one atop another. The hum deepened, and the walls exhaled. I didn't panic. I didn't think to. The containment had worked too well. Panic requires an identity, something distinct enough to want to escape, to resist. What I felt, instead, was recognition, familiarity, as if I had seen this moment before, many times. Perhaps I had. Perhaps this was not the first reset. The floor beneath me rippled once, a pulse traveling through concrete. I looked down to see faint lines appearing on the surface, forming an intricate grid of intersecting symbols. My feet moved automatically to stand within one of the squares I didn't decide to. I just knew it was where I should stand. The hum synchronized with my heartbeat, and then the voice came. Subject C-147, compliance index, stable, reset procedure initializing. It was female, neutral, synthesized the same tone as the building's automated elevator, but with something human lingering beneath it. Do not resist. I didn't. The ceiling lights began to pulse in rhythm, one flash every 12. 12 seconds. My vision blurred slightly with each burst, but my body stayed perfectly still. I realized the pulse wasn't just light, it was instruction. Each flicker carried a command, a pattern, an overwrite. I could feel it layering over my consciousness, peeling away everything unnecessary, everything individual. The hum inside the walls rose to meet the pulse, forming a single droning chord that vibrated behind my teeth. I tried to close my eyes, but even darkness couldn't shield me. The commands didn't need vision anymore. They lived in sound. Subject C-147, the voice said again. Recite the core rule. I hesitated. For a moment, just a flicker, a part of me wanted to ask which one. There had been so many. No eye contact, shoe alignment, hood symmetry, the dozens of clauses and exceptions, each layered upon the last until the rules were no longer about action but about thought. But my mouth opened automatically. The words flowed, smooth and practiced. Observation ensures continuity. Deviation erases identity. The voice hummed, almost pleased. Correct. Proceed with stage 2. Stage 2. The phrase rang somewhere deep inside me, triggering a flood of fragmented memory flashes of corridors, white coats, needles, screaming. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, erased. A door appeared on the far wall where none had existed. The moment I noticed it, it was already half open. I walked toward it without conscious effort, the sound of my bare feet echoing in perfect sync with the building's pulse. Beyond the doorway was a long corridor, bright, metallic, reflective, the kind of corridor that doesn't exist in any real apartment building. More like a lab. Each step forward triggered a subtle shift in the walls, as though the hallway was correcting itself around me, constantly rearranging to maintain containment. At the end of the corridor stood a glass partition. Behind it, I saw them, the others, dozens, maybe hundreds, standing motionless in identical gray hoods. Their faces calm, serene, their hands placed neatly at their sides. Each stood within a faintly glowing grid, just like mine. And on the wall above them, Building C, active subjects, 147. The hum reverberated through the chamber. The lights pulsed once more, and then I realized something was wrong. 147 wasn't the number of residents, it was the number of resets. The voice returned, now softer, more human. Chris, my name. It had been so long since I'd heard it that it sounded foreign, almost dangerous. I turned toward the sound, but there was no speaker, no source. The voice came from everywhere. You have reached cognitive alignment. Your previous iteration was compliant but incomplete. The reset will finalize containment. A pause. A faint crackle of static, like hesitation. You'll remember only what we need you to. The lights dimmed. The hum lowered to a near silence. For the first time in what felt like years, I could think clearly. And in that clarity, a single dangerous thought surfaced, something raw and human, buried deep beneath all the conditioning. What if I don't reset? The thought was barely formed before the building reacted. The air thickened, static crackling through the walls. I heard movement in the distance, synchronized footsteps, dozens of them, approaching. The residents, the others. I took a step back. Another. The hum rose sharply, punishing the deviation. The voice, still calm but now with a tremor beneath its tone, whispered, "Do not resist. Reset is restoration." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside me. I stumbled backward until I hit the cold glass partition, and that's when I saw my reflection, or what was left of it. My face was blank. No expression, no emotion. Just a faint pattern of static flickering beneath my skin, like circuitry. I could see words scrolling faintly behind my eyes. Commands, phrases, the language of compliance. The reset wasn't just starting. It had already begun. The footsteps stopped behind me. I turned slowly. The hallway was filled with them, now residents of Building C. Identical hoods drawn tight, eyes dull and silver under the fluorescent light. The air hummed with the rhythm of their synchronized breathing. One of them stepped forward, and I recognized him immediately. He was me, or rather, an earlier version, eyes hollow, mouth slightly parted in that permanent half-smile of compliance. His voice, when he spoke, was not quite human. Deviation detected. Self-correction required. He raised a hand, and the others mirrored him in perfect unison. I backed away, pressing against the glass, heart pounding. "I don't want this," I whispered, though even as I said it, my voice trembled with uncertainty. Did I want anything anymore? Was there even a version of me left capable of wanting? The other Chris tilted his head, as if examining a malfunction. Then he said quietly, "Desire is deviation. We will help you forget." The hum returned in full force, a tidal wave of sound that swallowed everything. My vision fragmented into geometric shapes. My heartbeat synced perfectly with the pulse. The walls began to fold inward like origami, collapsing into endless grids of light and shadow. Reset commencing. The voice intoned. Observation cycle. 12.12. Compliance ratio. Stable. And I felt the walls of my mind softening, memories slipping away in clean, clinical precision. The laughter of the neighbors, the echo of my own thoughts, even the feeling of resistance itself. I tried to cling to something, anything, but the only memory that remained was the sound of a door closing long ago when I first moved into Building C, a door that had locked from the outside. And then silence. For a moment, I thought the reset had failed. I opened my eyes and found myself standing once again in the lobby of Building C, suitcase in hand, hood hanging loose around my neck. The walls were familiar. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the air. At the front desk sat a woman in gray, face obscured by the brim of her cap. She smiled politely and handed me a folded paper. "Welcome to Building C," she said. "Please read the rules carefully." I unfolded it. The ink was fresh. The title at the top read, "Official Regulations Building C, Updated." I skimmed down the list, eyes catching on the new edition near the bottom. Rule 12.12. Do not question the reset. A faint unease flickered through me, but it dissolved almost immediately, replaced by calm compliance. I nodded, tucked the paper into my pocket, and smiled. The woman's eyes glimmered faintly silver as she said, "Welcome home, Chris." That night, I aligned my shoes by the door. At exactly 3 a.m., I placed one outside, as the rules instructed. At 3:01, I heard footsteps in the hall, slow, rhythmic, perfectly synchronized. A soft knock. 3 times, I opened the door, and there stood another resident face, shadowed beneath a gray hood identical to mine. He handed me a small package, wrapped in plain paper. My hands trembled slightly as I unwrapped it. Inside was a mirror. In its surface, I saw myself calm, compliant, complete. But for a moment, just a flicker, I thought I saw the reflection smile before I did. Then the hum returned. The lights pulsed once, and everything aligned again. And now, the stories end, or perhaps they begin again. The red dress still waits, on Route 17. The crimson reflection watches from your eyes. The 2317 artifact ticks on, counting your stolen memories. Building C rearranges itself silently, always observing. And the heirlooms toll. It searches, ever patient, for its next companion. If tonight's tales linger in your thoughts, that is no accident. You may find yourself glancing at mirrors, doors, or objects you once ignored, and feeling, just for a moment, that they are watching back. Rest if you can, sleep if you dare, and remember, some doors, once opened, never close.